Welcome to Noir Street. Like, subscribe, and stay on Noir Street. Tell me, which part of the world are you watching from?
Chapter 1. The ticket on the desk Helen Carter came to Nero Wolfe's office at 20 minutes past 5 on a Tuesday afternoon, carrying a train ticket, a brown envelope, and the expression of a woman who had found a snake in a filing cabinet and was not sure whether to scream or prepare an invoice. I know the time because at 20 minutes past 5 Wolfe had just returned from the plant rooms. From 4 until 6 each afternoon he attended to the orchids on the roof, and anything that tried to interfere with that schedule was expected to apologize in writing. Helen was 34, trim, dark-haired, and dressed in a grey office suit that had been selected for usefulness rather than applause. Her eyes moved quickly, but her hands were steady. I showed her into the office. Wolfe sat behind his desk in the oversized chair made especially for him. A glass vase containing 3 pale orchids stood near his right elbow. He regarded Helen, the brown envelope, and the ticket in that order. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, "I want to hire you to find out who has been traveling under the names of dead people." Wolfe's brows rose 1/8 of an inch. For him that was nearly a cheer. "Sit down." She took the red leather chair. I went to my desk, rolled a sheet into the typewriter, and waited. Wolfe said, "You are Helen Carter, secretary to Charles Whitmore." "Yes." "Whitmore Consolidated Properties." "Yes, a large concern, large enough to hide money and respectable enough to dislike questions." "That is true of most large concerns. Proceed." She placed the brown envelope on his desk, but kept the ticket in her hand. "For 6 months I have been checking travel expenses for Mr. Whitmore. The company owns buildings and warehouses in 5 states. Our managers travel often, and the accounts include hundreds of railway fares. Last week I discovered a group of journeys charged to the company by employees who could not have made them. Why not? One was in the hospital. One had left the company 2 years ago. 2 were dead," I said. "Dead men are poor travelers. They never complain about the seats." Helen glanced at me. "Somebody has used their names to withdraw money from branch accounts. The tickets make the trips appear legitimate." Wolfe extended a hand. The ticket, she hesitated before giving it to him. It was a one-way railway ticket from New York to Ashcroft, a small town upstate. The train was scheduled to leave Grand Central at 10:10 that evening. The passenger name, written in block letters, was Helen Carter. The fare was charged to Whitmore Consolidated Account W-17. Wolfe examined both sides. "You purchased this? Number, did you request it? Number, when did you receive it?" "This morning. It was inside the company mail, in an envelope without a note." "Who knew you were examining the travel accounts?" "Mr. Whitmore, George Pike, the company accountant, Daniel Whitmore, Mr. Whitmore's nephew, Ruth Bell, our legal advisor, possibly Samuel Kent, the junior clerk. He carries files between departments." "Why bring it here instead of to the police?" "Because the police would go to Mr. Whitmore, and I don't know whether Mr. Whitmore is part of it." That improved Wolfe's interest enough for him to lean back. Helen continued. "The ticket is dated today. If I am found with it, it looks as if I plan to leave town tonight." "Are you planning to leave?" "Number, then why keep it?" "Because I think it is a threat. Threats commonly contain verbs. This one contains a destination." Wolfe looked at the ticket again. "What is in Ashcroft?" "A Whitmore storage property, Warehouse 9. "What is stored there?" "Old company records, furniture, and files from closed offices." "You have been there?" "Never." "Do you know anyone there?" "Number yet. Someone has bought you a ticket to it." "Yes." Wolfe returned the ticket. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to identify who purchased it and why. I also want you to keep this envelope." She pushed the brown envelope closer. I opened it at Wolfe's nod. Inside were photocopies of 12 travel vouchers, 4 railway receipts, and a handwritten list of dates and amounts. At the bottom of the list Helen had written, "Ask why the return halves are always missing." "Where are the originals?" I asked. "In the Whitmore office safe." "Who can open it?" "Mr. Whitmore, Mr. Pike, Miss Bell, and me." Wolfe's eyes went to the wall clock. It was 5:36. Dinner would be served at 7:30, and he disliked beginning a case when food was approaching. What fee do you propose? Helen removed $500 from her handbag. That is all I can pay now. Wolfe did not look at the money. You are employed by a wealthy man. Why should you pay? Because I do not know whether I am protecting him or exposing him. Do you fear for your life? She looked at the ticket. I didn't this morning. And now? Now someone expects me to be on a train at 10:10. Then do not be. Her mouth tightened. That may be exactly what they expect me to decide. Wolfe closed his eyes. Mr. Goodwin will take the ticket and the documents. You will return to your office, behave normally, and telephone us at 8 o'clock. Do not discuss this visit. Helen reached for the ticket. I need to take it. Number if it disappears. Whoever sent it will know I became frightened. You are frightened. I don't want them to know. Wolfe opened his eyes. Your desire to bait an unknown adversary without adequate protection is foolish. Perhaps, but if I leave the ticket here, they may destroy the original vouchers tonight. Archie can accompany you. Number everyone in the office knows Mr. Goodwin works for you, I said. My fame has drawbacks. Helen took the ticket from Wolfe's desk and slipped it into her handbag. 8 o'clock, she said. I'll call. She left the envelope and the $500. I saw her to the door. Rain had begun, light and cold, spreading a dark shine across West 35th Street. She walked east without opening an umbrella. When I returned to the office, Wolfe had picked up the handwritten list. You accepted the case, I said. I accepted documents. And money. You opened the envelope, not I. You told me to. That establishes your involvement. It also establishes dinner. Wolfe ignored that. The ticket was folded once lengthwise and twice across. Did you observe? Yes. Miss Carter carried it in her handbag unfolded. She put it in a side pocket. Indeed, the folds were made before she received it. So, a railway ticket folded into 4 parts has likely been carried in a wallet. A man's wallet. Possibly. More important, the central fold was worn. The ticket had been carried before today. It was issued today, so it says. I took another look at the photocopied railway receipts. Each bore an issue date, a passenger name, a destination, and the Whitmore account number. The issue stamp could have been altered. Or the ticket stock was prepared in advance. Or someone possessing blank company tickets. At 7:30 Fritz served roast chicken with chestnut stuffing, baked onions, and a green salad. Wolfe had argued over for half an hour. I ate well because I have always believed that a murder call is easier to receive when the stomach has been treated fairly. At 8 o'clock, Helen Carter did not telephone. At 8:10, I called the Whitmore office. The night operator said Miss Carter was not answering her extension. At 8:15, I reached for my coat. Wolfe finished chewing before he spoke. Wait 5 minutes. Why, she may be occupied. At 10:10, she's supposed to be on a train. At 8, she was supposed to call. She struck me as a woman who respects clocks. Wolfe looked toward the kitchen door, where Fritz waited with the main dish. 3 minutes. It was a compromise large enough to damage him. At 8:18, the telephone rang. The caller was Inspector Thomas Reed. Goodwin. Yes. Does Nero Wolfe know a woman named Helen Carter? He met her this afternoon. That was fast. What was? Charles Whitmore is dead. Miss Carter found him in his private office. I put down my fork. Where? Whitmore Consolidated Offices, number 20, 2 Riddle Street, beside Charles Whitmore's desk. How? Blow to the head. There's a bronze train, shaped paperweight on the carpet with blood on it. Who found her? Charles Whitmore is dead. Miss Carter found him in his private office. Where is he? Here being questioned, and holding a train ticket that someone apparently wanted us to see. That sounds healthy. There's something else. She was holding a train ticket in her right hand. New York to Ashcroft, 10:10 tonight. I looked at Wolfe. He was watching me. Reed continued. Whitmore says she had access to company funds and may have planned to run. Her desk drawers are open and a file of travel vouchers is missing. She didn't plan to run, you know that. She told us. What did she tell you? I'll bring it. Reed sighed. Bring Wolfe. You're confusing ambition with transport. Then bring the papers and whatever part of Wolfe can fit in a taxi. I hung up. Wolfe dabbed his lips with his napkin. Report. I did. He looked at the roast chicken. Confound it. That was an oath from Wolfe, and a strong one. I put the photocopies into my inside pocket, took my coat, and left before he could decide. Murder was less important than chestnut stuffing. Riddle Street was narrow, wet, and nearly empty. Number 20. 2 was a 6-story stone office building with Whitmore Consolidated. Carved over the entrance, 2 patrol cars waited at the curb. A small crowd stood under umbrellas, pretending not to enjoy itself. The Whitmore offices occupied the 3rd floor. Reed met me in the reception room. He was broad, shouldered, with tired brown eyes, and a habit of looking at every object, as if it had given a false name. You came without him. He's dining. A man is dead, and the woman you met this afternoon is our principal suspect. He knows. That's why he said, confound it. Reed took me into Charles Whitmore's private office. Charles Whitmore lay behind the large oak desk. Blood darkened his silver hair above the right temple. A bronze paperweight shaped like a locomotive rested on the carpet near his shoulder. A cup of coffee stood on the desk. A chair had been pushed back sharply, and the wall safe behind the desk was open. The room had 2 doors, one leading into the reception office and another into a narrow records room. Both were unlocked. The windows faced Riddle Street and were closed against the rain. Helen Carter stood near the fireplace with Inspector Reed's officer beside her. She still wore the grey office suit in which she had visited Wolfe. Her face was pale, but her hands were steady. The railway ticket was sealed inside an evidence sleeve on Reed's desk. Beside her stood Daniel Whitmore, Charles's nephew, a nervous young man with pale hair and a red necktie. George Pike, the accountant, was short and round, with rimless spectacles. Ruth Bell, the legal advisor, wore black and held a leather folder against her side. Samuel Kent, the junior clerk, sat near the door looking as if he wished to become part of the wallpaper. Reed pointed to me. This is Archie Goodwin. Miss Carter visited Nero Wolfe this afternoon. Daniel Whitmore turned toward Helen. Why? She wanted advice, I said. About what? Travel. His eyes moved toward the ticket. Helen said, I found Mr. Whitmore at 7:53. The ticket was lying on the desk. I picked it up before I understood that he was dead. Reed said, You were still holding it when Samuel Kent entered at 8:05. Yes, why didn't you telephone the police immediately? I was frightened. The safe was open, the travel file was missing, and the ticket had been issued in my name. Where were you before 7:53? I asked. In my office. I returned here to give Mr. Whitmore the Ashcroft property file, Ruth Bell said. Charles left the Riddle Club shortly after 7. Daniel and I remained together until 7:50. Daniel nodded too quickly. George Pike spoke from beside the desk. I left the office at 7:30. Charles was alive when I last saw him. Samuel Kent said, I left at 7:40. Reed looked at him. You told me 7:20. I may have mistaken the time. You punched out at 7:41, then it was 7:41. Helen Carter lay on the carpet beside a large oak desk. Her left arm was beneath her. Her right hand rested near her shoulder, closed around the railway ticket. Blood darkened her hair above the right temple. The bronze paperweight lay 3 feet away. A cup of coffee stood on the desk. A chair had been pushed back sharply. The wall safe behind the desk was open. The room had 2 doors, one into the reception office and one into a narrow records room. Both were unlocked. The windows faced Riddle Street and were closed against the rain. Charles Whitmore stood near the fireplace. He was 60 silver, haired heavy through the chest, and dressed in a dark business suit. His expression said that the police had been invited to remove a corpse and had exceeded their authority by asking questions. Beside him stood Daniel Whitmore, his nephew, a nervous young man with pale hair and a red necktie. George Pike, the accountant, was short and round with rimless spectacles. Ruth Bell, the legal advisor, wore black and held a leather folder against her side. Samuel Kent, the junior clerk, sat near the door, looking as if he wished to become part of the wallpaper. Reed pointed to me. "This is Archie Goodwin. Helen Carter visited Nero Wolfe today." Charles Whitmore turned. "Why?" She wanted advice. "About what?" "Travel." His eyes went to the ticket in her hand. "She stole from me," he said. Quick conclusion. "The travel file is gone. She controlled the vouchers. She had a ticket to Ashcroft. What else am I to believe? That someone killed her. She may have had an accomplice." Reed said. "She was struck from behind. She didn't do that herself." Whitmore's jaw tightened. "I found her at 8:05. I came back for a contract. The office was empty except for Miss Carter." "Where were you before that?" I asked. "At dinner with my nephew and Miss Bell." "Daniel nodded too soon," Ruth said. "We left the Riddle Club at 7:50. Mr. Whitmore returned here. Daniel and I took a taxi, together, for 6 blocks. Then I got out." George Pike spoke from beside the desk. "I left the office at 7:30. Helen was alive. She said she had work to finish." Samuel Kent said, "I left at 7:40. Reed looked at him. "You told me 7:20. I may have mistaken the time. You punched out at 7:41. Then it was 7:41. I walked around the desk. Helen's handbag lay open on the chair. Inside were a purse, keys, a comb, and an unused subway token. There was no clothing, no toothbrush, no luggage check, and no sign of a woman preparing to abandon New York. The wall safe held deeds and contracts, but no travel vouchers. One empty space in the lower shelf had collected less dust than the rest. I took the sealed ticket from Reed and examined it beneath the desk lamp. The ticket carried 2 old folds, but one edge was newly bent where Helen had gripped it after discovering Charles's body. I looked at Reed. "Did you move her hand?" "No." "Who touched the ticket?" "No one." The ticket faced outward. Its destination and departure time were plainly visible, almost as if the dead woman were displaying them. That was theatrical. Helen had carried the ticket in her handbag when she left Wolfe's office. If she had pulled it out herself, she would likely have held it by one end. Helen's handbag lay open on a chair. Inside were a purse, keys, a comb, and an unused subway token. There was no luggage check or other sign that she intended to abandon New York. Reed handed me the evidence sleeve containing the ticket. Helen said it had been lying face up on Charles's blotter when she entered. She picked it up before realizing that Charles was dead and was still holding it when Samuel Kent arrived. The ticket's destination and departure time were plainly visible. Someone had placed it where Helen would notice it, pick it up, and appear to possess evidence of her own planned escape. I leaned closer. A small rectangular hole had been punched near the lower edge. "Was that hole there this afternoon?" Reed asked. "No." "What does it mean?" "I don't know." George Pike adjusted his spectacles. "It means the ticket was checked." Everyone looked at him. Pike flushed. "Railway conductors punch tickets." "The train hasn't left," Reed said. "Then perhaps it was an issue mark." I straightened. The ticket told us Helen planned to leave at 10:10. The punch told us the ticket had already been presented for travel. Both could not be true. "Get me a magnifying glass," I said. Reed produced one from a desk drawer. I examined the tiny punched shape. It was not round. It formed a 5-gen pointed star with one broken tip. In the brown envelope at Wolfe's office, the photocopies of the other railway receipts showed similar marks near their lower edges. I pulled them from my pocket. 3 carried the same broken star. Helen had written a note beside one, "Checker Chaussee, night window." The ticket in her hand was not merely a ticket purchased in her name. It belonged to the group of false journeys she had been investigating. Reed saw it. This wasn't an escape plan. No, it was evidence. Yes. Charles Whitmore came closer. What documents are those? Helen left them with Wolfe. You will give them to me? No. They belong to my company. At the moment they belong to a murder investigation and a man who weighs enough to defend possession. Reed held out a hand. Let me see. I gave him the photocopies. He compared the account number, issue stamp, serial line, and broken Jan star punch. The same checker handled all four, he said, or the same person possessed the punch. Ruth Bell opened her leather folder. Whitmore Consolidated once operated a private ticket office for employees. Large companies were permitted to issue railway tickets against established accounts. Where was it? Reed asked. In this building. It closed 5 years ago. Who kept the blank tickets and punches? George Pike answered reluctantly. The accounting department. Reed looked at him. Pike removed his spectacles and polished them, though they were clean. I assumed the unused stock had been destroyed. Who was responsible for destroying it? I was. The room acquired a little more interest. I examined the ticket again. Near the left edge was a pale stain. It had the shape of a thumb, but no visible ridges. The paper smelled faintly of machine oil, not railway grease, office machine oil. On Helen's desk in the outer room stood an old numbering press used to stamp vouchers. Its handle carried the same smell. I checked the serial number on the ticket against the photocopies. The earlier false journeys ended with ticket numbers 4816, 4819, 4823 and 4827. Helen's ticket was 4831, a sequence. The ticket had been drawn from the same old stock, Reed said. Someone issued this through the closed company office, killed Charles, and left the ticket where Helen would find it. Probably. To make us think she killed Charles and planned to flee. Also to make us stop asking why dead employees had been traveling. Samuel Kent stood up suddenly. I need water. Reed blocked the door. You need a chair. Kent sat. I turned the ticket over, across the back, visible only when the paper caught the desk lamp. Someone had written 4 numbers in pencil, Tibisen Ijo, not Helen's handwriting. The strokes were heavier and slanted left. Does that mean anything? Reed asked. George Pike said no. Ruth Bell said no. Daniel Whitmore looked at the floor. Charles Whitmore looked at Daniel. That was enough to mark it for later. I telephoned Wolfe from Helen's desk. He answered on the second ring. Weirport, I told him about Charles's body, the open safe, the missing travel file, the ticket Helen found on the blotter, the broken star punch, the old company ticket stock, George Pike's duty to destroy it, and the penciled numbers. Condition of the ticket? Wolfe asked. Same old folds. Now it has a fresh checkers punch. It smells of numbering, machine oil. The hand face up on the blotter. Miss Carter picked it up before Kent entered. Probably planted after Charles died. Time of death. Doctor says between 7:40 and 8. Mr. Whitmore found her at 8:05. Yes. Who knew Miss Carter had visited us? No one, according to her. Nonsense. Someone knew she was investigating the vouchers and prepared the ticket before she came. Her visit merely forced action. You're taking the case? I took it when I retained her documents. You told me you retained the documents, not the case. Do not pester me with stale language. Bring Inspector Reed and the ticket. What about the suspects? Leave them where they are. They move, then have Mr. Reed prevent it. I looked at Reed. Wolfe wants you at the brownstone. Now. Dinner was interrupted. He's in a dangerous mood. Reed took the ticket from the evidence sleeve and held it beneath the lamp. What different story does he think it tells? I pointed to the Whitmore account number and the broken star punch. Helen didn't buy it. The company did. She wasn't running from a theft. She had found the road the stolen money traveled. Reed looked toward Helen Carter. George Pike, Ruth Bell, Daniel Whitmore, and Samuel Kent. 5 people had access to the offices. 4 had reasons to fear the missing travel file. One of them had issued a ticket in Helen Carter's name, killed Charles Whitmore beside his desk, and left the false journey where Helen would find it. Outside, the rain ran down the office windows in silver lines. Far across Manhattan, the 10:10 train to Ashcroft was being prepared for passengers. Helen Carter would not be among them, but her ticket had already begun its journey. Chapter 2. The journey she never took. The train ticket lay in the center of Nero Wolfe's desk, where it received more attention than most human beings and deserved nearly as much. It was a one-way ticket from New York to Ashcroft, good for the 10:10 train on the night Charles Whitmore was murdered. Helen Carter's name had been typed across the face. The small print showed that it had been purchased 3 days before the crime. Inspector Thomas Reed sat in the red leather chair. Helen occupied the yellow one, with her hands folded tightly in her lap. I was at my desk with my notebook open. Wolfe leaned back with his eyes half closed, looking as if he might sleep, but listening for every misplaced word. Reed tapped the ticket. "You told me yesterday that you had never seen it before the night of the murder." Helen shook her head. "I said I had never seen it on Mr. Whitmore's desk." "You bought it on Saturday?" "Yes." "You plan to leave New York?" "Yes." "On the same night Charles Whitmore was killed?" "I did not choose the date because of Mr. Whitmore." "You worked for him for 9 years. You had access to his office, his safe, and his private accounts. He was found dead beside the desk, and you were found in the room holding this ticket." "I picked it up from the blotter." "Why?" "Because it was mine." Reed leaned forward. "How did it get there?" "I don't know." "Who knew you had bought it?" Helen looked at the carpet. "That question is becoming tiresome," Reed said. Wolfe opened his eyes. "Then ask a better one." Reed turned toward him. "I am questioning a murder suspect." "You are repeating a question she has elected not to answer. Repetition may exhaust a child. It seldom improves an adult." Reed's jaw moved. He and Wolfe had known each other long enough to dislike each other efficiently. "What would you ask?" Reed said. "Why did she leave behind her return?" Helen's head lifted. Reed glanced at the ticket. "It is one way. I am not referring to a second ticket, Mr. Goodwin." I took a sheet from my notebook. I had spent the morning examining Helen's apartment at number 6 Riddle Street with Reed and 2 policemen. The place had been neat enough to make me feel untidy merely by entering it. A small suitcase stood packed beside her bed. It contained 2 dresses, 3 blouses, underclothing, walking shoes, a hairbrush, and a photograph of a young man in a railway uniform. Everything required for a short stay had been packed. Everything needed for a permanent disappearance had been left behind. Her bank book remained in a locked drawer. Her savings totaled a little over $6,000. Her passport rested beside it. Her lease had 7 months to run. The rent for the following month had already been paid. 2 winter coats hung in the wardrobe. Her mother's jewelry remained in a small box. Personal letters, tax papers, and employment records had not been touched. In the kitchen, milk was scheduled for delivery the next morning. On the hall table, a library book was due Friday. A woman preparing to escape forever does not generally worry about a late fee. I read the list aloud. Reed said, "She may have intended to return for those things." "She was supposed to be running from a murder," I said. "Returning weakens the idea." Helen looked at me. "I was going away for 2 days. Why take a one-way ticket?" Reed asked. "Because I did not know when I would finish." "Finish what?" She said nothing. Wolfe frowned. "Miss Carter, you retained me yesterday to investigate false journeys charged to Whitmore Consolidated. You did not mention that you had purchased a journey of your own. I didn't think it concerned the false tickets. Now Mr. Whitmore is dead, the travel file is missing, and your ticket was placed upon his desk. Your judgment on what concerns the matter has lost authority." Helen's face tightened. "I cannot tell you why I was going." "Cannot," I promised. "To whom?" "I cannot say." Wolfe shut his eyes again. "Promises to the dead are frequently vanity. Promises to the living may be obstruction. Which is this?" Helen went pale. That answered one question. "The person is alive," Reed said. Helen looked at him. "I did not say that." Reed took a photograph from his coat pocket. It showed Charles Whitmore's office as the police had found it. Whitmore lay behind the desk, his head near the open safe. A bronze paperweight shaped like a locomotive rested on the carpet beside him. Helen had been found kneeling near the body with the ticket in her right hand. Samuel Kent, the junior clerk, had entered seconds later and called the police. The medical examiner placed the murder between 7:40 and 8 o'clock. Helen admitted entering at 7:55. "I went to return a file," she said. "What file?" Reed asked. "The Ashcroft property file." "Why did you have it?" "Mr. Whitmore gave it to me that afternoon." "Where is it?" "It was on the desk when I found him. It was not there when the police arrived." Helen stared. "I placed it beside his hand. Someone removed it before the room was secured. Then ask Samuel Kent. He was the only person who entered after me." Reed's expression did not change. "Kent says there was no file. Then he is lying. Or you are." Wolfe moved a finger against the arm of his chair. "Mr. Reed, who first identified the ticket as Miss Carter's?" "Charles Whitmore's nephew, Daniel. Before or after examining it?" "Before. He saw the destination from the doorway and said Helen had planned to flee." "How did he know her name was on it?" Reed looked at the ticket. The passenger's name was typed in small letters beneath the destination. From the doorway, 12 feet away, Daniel could not have read it. "He knew about the ticket," I said. Helen's hands tightened. Wolfe opened his eyes. "Did Daniel Whitmore know you intended to travel?" "Number, who did?" "I won't answer. Your refusal protects someone who may have placed the ticket beside a murdered man." "I know. Then you are either loyal or witless." Helen met his gaze. "Possibly both." Wolfe made a small sound in his throat. He had more respect for a direct answer than a prudent one. Reed picked up the ticket by its edges. "The station clerk remembers selling it. Saturday at 4:20, cash purchase." "To Miss Carter?" Wolfe asked. "He cannot identify her. He remembers a woman wearing a brown hat," Helen said. "I wore a blue hat." Reed turned. "You admit purchasing it, but the clerk remembers another woman. I sent someone." "Who?" Again she was silent. Wolfe looked at me. "Archie, the ticket's folds." I brought the desk lamp closer. The ticket had been folded twice before it was placed on Charles Whitmore's desk. One crease ran across Helen's name. A second ran through the departure time. The edges were worn, showing that it had been carried in the folded condition for at least several days. But the ticket had not been folded to fit Helen's purse. Her purse contained a long side pocket wide enough to hold it flat. It had been folded to fit something smaller. "A man's wallet," Reed said. "Or a narrow envelope," I replied. Wolfe said, "Miss Carter, you purchased the ticket on Saturday, but did not retain possession of it." Helen looked at him sharply. "You gave money to another person," Wolfe continued. "That person bought the ticket and kept it. You expected it to be returned before your departure." Helen said nothing. "Instead," Wolfe said, "it appeared beside Charles Whitmore's body." Reed put the ticket down. "So whoever bought it was in Whitmore's office on the night of the murder." "Possibly," Wolfe said. "Or gave it to someone who was." Helen rose. "I want to leave," Reed said. "Sit down. I have answered enough. You have avoided enough." She remained standing. "You cannot hold me. I can arrest you for withholding evidence." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Do not threaten her badly. If you arrest her now, the person she protects will learn that she has not spoken and will have time to destroy whatever remains in Ashcroft." Helen turned toward him. "That was the second answer she gave without words," Wolfe said. "Your journey concerned Ashcroft. Number, it concerned Warehouse 9. Number, the ticket's destination, the missing property file, and the fact that Charles Whitmore gave you that file on the afternoon of his death make denial childish." Helen sat again. Reed said, "What is in Warehouse 9? "I don't know." "You plan to go there?" "I plan to meet someone nearby." "Who?" Helen looked at Wolfe. If I tell you, will you protect him? Him, I said. That saves time. She ignored me, Wolfe said. I do not promise protection before knowing from what. Helen took a breath. My brother. The photograph in her suitcase showed a young man wearing a railway uniform. I had assumed he was a sweetheart because I am human and therefore occasionally lazy. His name? Reed asked. Peter Carter. Where is he? Ashcroft. Why the secrecy? Because Peter Carter is supposed to be dead. Even Wolfe's eyes opened fully. Helen continued. 7 years ago, Peter worked in the Whitmore freight department. A warehouse fire killed 3 men. Peter was blamed for falsifying the load records and causing the fire. His body was never found, but everyone believed he had died in it. Reed said, You know he survived. I received a letter 2 weeks ago. Where is it? I burned it. What did it say? That he had proof the fire was arranged to destroy company records. He said, Charles Whitmore had recently learned the truth and wanted to meet him. Why didn't Peter come to New York? He believed someone in the Whitmore company was watching the stations. Who bought your ticket? A woman named Alice Gray. She runs the boarding house where Peter is staying. Reed wrote down the name. Why did she keep the ticket? Peter's instructions. She was to mail it to me on the day of travel so no one in the office would see it. But she didn't mail it. Did Daniel Whitmore know Peter? Yes, they worked together before the fire. Wolfe's lips tightened. Miss Carter, you still have not told the truth. Helen stared at him. You packed for 2 days, Wolfe said. You retained your apartment, money, passport, and personal papers. You did not intend to flee, yet you arranged a secret journey through a woman in Ashcroft and concealed it even from me. Your purpose was not to escape Charles Whitmore's murder. It was to complete something he had begun. Helen lowered her gaze. Mr. Whitmore told me Peter was innocent, she said. He said the proof was hidden in Warehouse 9. We were going to recover it together. On the night he died. Mr. Whitmore planned to travel the following morning. I was going first to make sure Peter was safe. Reed leaned forward. Who else knew? George Pike prepared the warehouse access papers. Ruth Bell drafted a statement for Mr. Whitmore to sign. Daniel overheard us arguing about Ashcroft Samuel Kent. He carried the property file to Mr. Whitmore's office. 4 people had known enough to interfere. Wolfe looked at the ticket again. Why was the return half missing? Helen seemed surprised. It was a one-way ticket. The serial line indicates it was issued from a return ticket booklet. The outward half is numbered 4831. The return half would be 4831B. Reed picked it up. The letter A appeared after the number in print, so small I had missed it. Where is the return half? He asked. Helen shook her head. I never saw either half before the murder. Wolfe said, the ticket was not purchased merely to take you to Ashcroft. It was divided. One half was sent toward New York. The other remained with the person you were meant to meet. Peter, Helen whispered. Possibly. A divided ticket can serve as identification. Each bearer presents a matching half. No name, letter, or spoken password is required. Reed stood. If Peter has the return half, he can prove who bought the ticket, and perhaps who betrayed the journey, Wolfe said. The telephone rang. He answered. It was a police officer calling for Reed from Ashcroft. Alice Gray's boarding house had been searched. Peter Carter was gone. His room had been overturned. A patch of blood marked the floor. In the fireplace, the police had found the charred edge of a railway ticket. Only the final characters of its number remained visible. 31. By repeated the message. Helen gripped the arms of her chair. They found the other half. No, Wolfe said. They found enough of it to frighten us. He closed his eyes and leaned back. The ticket on Charles Whitmore's desk did not announce that Miss Carter intended to run. It announced that someone knew where her unfinished journey would end. Outside the brownstone, New York traffic moved through the evening rain. Somewhere north of the city, a railway line curved toward Ashcroft and Warehouse. 9. Helen Carter had never boarded the train, but someone had reached her destination before her. Chapter 10. The secretary's hidden reason. Thomas Reed began Wednesday morning by asking how long Helen Carter had worked for Charles Whitmore. He received 4 answers. Daniel Whitmore said 10 years. George Pike said 11. Ruth Bell said 9. Samuel Kent guessed 15, and then admitted he had no idea. Helen said 12. I joined the company when I was 20 Jan 2, she told Reed. I worked 3 years in the records department, and 9 as Mr. Whitmore's private secretary. We were in Wolfe's office. Helen sat in the red leather chair, Reed stood near my desk, and Wolfe was upstairs with the orchids. It was 10 Jan 30, which meant he would not come down for another half hour, even if the building caught fire. I had once asked what disaster would make him interrupt the morning plant Jan room schedule. He had said an earthquake strong enough to bring the orchids downstairs. Reed opened Helen's employment file. 12 years, he said. You knew Whitmore's business better than his partners did. I knew his calendar, correspondence, and filing habits. You knew his private accounts. I typed the statements. You knew whom he met. If he told me, you knew what he concealed. No secretary knows everything her employer conceals. If she did, it would not be concealed. Reed sat down. Charles Whitmore was murdered within hours of giving you the Ashcroft property file. You planned to travel there under secret arrangements. Your brother, believed dead for 7 years, was waiting near Warehouse 9. Tell me what you found. I have told you. You told me Peter claimed the warehouse fire was arranged. You have not told me what made Charles believe him. Helen glanced at me. I said, Wolfe will ask the same question, only he'll make it sound as if you've insulted grammar. I found a number, she said. What number? T10 Sambay Ishijo. I took the train ticket from the evidence sleeve Reed had brought. 4 penciled figures appeared on its back. TB Sen Ujo Reed placed it before her. This number? Yes. What does it mean? A freight record, Volume 7, Section 3, page 19. When did you find it? Friday afternoon. The ticket had been purchased the following day, Reed noticed. You found the record Friday. On Saturday, Alice Gray purchased your ticket to Ashcroft. Helen nodded. So the discovery caused the journey. Yes. What was on page 19? I don't know. Reed stared at her. You decided to leave town over a page you never read. The page was missing. Then what did you find? A reference to it in Mr. Whitmore's private index. Helen leaned forward. Mr. Whitmore kept 2 filing systems. The company used numbered records. His private index used names and dates. On Friday, he asked me to find the original lease for Warehouse 9. While searching his index, I found Peter's name. Reed said nothing. The entry was dated 7 years ago, 3 days before the fire. It read, Carter objects to transfer. C. Saniojo DW present. GP authorized. W, I said. Daniel Whitmore. I assumed so. GP would be George Pike. Yes, what transfer? The freight stored in Warehouse 9. Reed opened his notebook. What freight? Medical supplies owned by North County Relief, blankets, bandages, canned food, and medicine intended for flood victims. The shipment was insured for $80,000. And it burned. That was the official account. What does Peter claim? That the freight was removed before the fire and sold through another company. Owned by whom? He did not say in his letter. Why would Charles Whitmore keep a reference proving fraud? Helen looked toward the office door. Because he had not known about it when it happened, I said. That is loyalty speaking, not evidence. I worked for him 12 years. That tells us you knew how he took coffee. It doesn't prove he was honest. Helen's eyes sharpened. He could be cold, proud, and stubborn. He could also be generous without wanting anyone to see it. I knew when he lied. Did he lie about the fire? For 7 years. That was better, Helen continued. When I showed him the index entry, he asked where I had found it. I told him. He locked the office door and said Peter had accused Daniel and George Pike before the fire. Charles did not believe him. He allowed the company lawyer to report Peter for altering freight records. Which company lawyer? Reed asked. Ruth Bell's father. Ruth took over the legal office after he died. So Charles helped frame your brother? Yes. Her voice was quiet, but nothing in it was weak. Why remain his secretary? Reed asked. I did not know until Friday. That was the hidden reason. Helen had not been running because Charles Whitmore was murdered. She had planned to leave because after 12 years of service, she had learned that Charles helped destroy her brother's name. What happened after he admitted it? Reed asked. I told him I was resigning. For good, I had not decided. I went home and packed enough for 2 days. I intended to meet Peter, hear his account, and then decide whether I would return. Yet you paid next month's rent and left your bank book behind. I was not escaping. I was seeking the truth. Why the secrecy? Charles said the people responsible might still be watching Warehouse 9. He said he needed proof before making accusations. I picked up the ticket. The ticket was purchased after you discovered the index entry. Yes. Who proposed dividing it into 2 halves? Peter. His letter said Alice Gray would buy a return ticket and keep 1 half. I was to carry the other. When we met, matching numbers would prove neither of us had been followed and replaced by someone else. A railway ticket, as identification. Yes. But you never received your half. It appeared on Charles's desk after he died. Reed tapped the penciled number, who wrote 7,319 on the back. Charles, you recognize his handwriting. I typed from it for 9 years. Then Charles handled the ticket. Helen stared at the 4 numbers as if she had not considered that. I said, he either received it from Alice Gray or from someone who intercepted her. Why would he place it on his desk? Reed asked. He may not have, I said. The killer wanted Helen to find it. Reed looked at her. Who knew you were returning the Ashcroft file that evening? Charles. Samuel Kent. George Pike saw me carrying it. Daniel. He was in the office around 7. Ruth Bell. She telephoned Charles at 6:30. I do not know what they discussed. At 11, Wolfe entered. He wore a dark brown suit and a yellow shirt. He crossed to his desk, settled into his chair, and looked at the ticket. Mr. Goodwin. I gave him the facts. Helen's 12 years with the company, the private index, Peter's objection, freight record, 7,319, the initials DW and GP, the relief shipment. Charles's admission, Helen's decision to meet her brother before choosing whether to resign. Wolfe listened without interruption. When I finished, he looked at Helen. You say you knew when Charles Whitmore lied. Usually. Did he lie when he said he had not known the freight was stolen? Helen hesitated. He did not tell the whole truth. What did he omit? I don't know. Then your claim is sentiment. She flushed. He would rub the edge of his desk with his thumb whenever he withheld something. He did it Friday. Did he name Daniel Whitmore? Did he name George Pike? Did he express surprise when you read their initials? Wolfe's lips tightened. He was not learning the facts from you. He already knew them. Yes. Then why ask you to find the Warehouse 9 lease? Helen frowned. I assumed he wanted the property description. An experienced businessman can obtain a property description from any current deed. He directed you to records containing the private index because he wished you to find Peter's name. Reed leaned back. You think Charles deliberately revealed the old entry? Of course. After 12 years, he knew precisely how Miss Carter searched his files. He placed the thread where she would pull it. Helen looked disturbed. Why not tell me directly? Because a confession makes the speaker responsible. A discovery allows him to pretend surprise. I said, Charles wanted her to contact Peter without admitting he knew Peter was alive. Wolfe nodded. Did you tell Charles about the letter from your brother? Yet on Friday he mentioned that proof remained at Warehouse 9. Helen stared. Yes. Then he knew about the letter, or had another source of information. Reed said. Alice Gray. Possibly. Wolfe held out his hand for the photocopies of the false travel vouchers. I gave them to him. He arranged 4 sheets in a row. Observe the destinations: Ashcroft, Belton, North Mills, and Harrow. Each location contains a closed Whitmore property. Each false traveler was charged with inspecting stored records. Reed looked at the amounts. The trips were not merely cover for withdrawing money. They created a record of visits to old warehouses. Why? Summernan has been searching them, Helen said. For page 7319, or for what the page identifies. Wolfe examined the dates. The first false journey occurred 6 months ago. When did Charles Whitmore begin asking you to review travel expenses 6 months ago? Again, he directed you toward discovery. Helen's expression hardened. He used me. Yes. To find the person searching the warehouses. Probably. Without warning me. He feared warning you would change your behavior. Reed said. Charles laid a trap and was killed before it closed. The doorbell rang. I went to answer it. Samuel Kent stood on the stoop, holding a flat parcel wrapped in brown paper. Rain had spotted his coat. His face was pale. I need to see Mr. Wolfe. Do you have an appointment? Number. Do you have information? He looked over his shoulder. I have Helen Carter's missing file. That qualified. I brought him into the office. Helen rose. Where did you get it? Kent placed the parcel on my desk. It was in my apartment when I returned last night. Reed stood. You told me you had never seen it. I was afraid. Open it. Kent pulled away the paper. Inside was the Ashcroft property file, tied with black tape. The top page was the lease for Warehouse 9. Beneath it were fire reports, insurance claims, and freight lists. Page 7319 was still missing. In its place lay a railway luggage receipt. The receipt was dated the day before Charles Whitmore's murder. It covered one locked trunk deposited at Ashcroft Station under the name Peter Carter. Across the bottom, in Charles Whitmore's handwriting, were the words, "The ticket identifies the person. The trunk identifies the crime." Helen sat down slowly. Reed looked at Kent. Who put this in your apartment? I don't know. How did they enter? The door wasn't forced. Who has a key? My landlord, my sister, Daniel Whitmore. That last name changed the air. Why does Daniel have a key? Reed asked. Kent swallowed. We share the apartment sometimes. Wolfe folded his hands over his middle. Mr. Kent, before Charles Whitmore died, what did Daniel ask you to remove from the office? Kent looked at Daniel's initials in the private index, the travel file. Did you remove it? Yes. Did you give it to him? I hid it in the records room. When I returned, it was gone. Who knew the hiding place? George Pike saw me. 3 names remained tied to the old fire: Daniel Whitmore, George Pike, and Peter Carter. One was accused. One controlled the accounts. One was supposed to be dead. Wolfe looked at Helen. You planned to travel because you discovered that your brother had been framed. Charles Whitmore died because someone feared you would finish the journey. Helen touched the unused ticket. What is inside Peter's trunk? Wolfe's eyes closed. The answer, perhaps, or another invitation. Reed picked up the luggage receipt. I'll have Ashcroft police seize it. Wolfe opened his eyes. Reed glared at him. Why? Because the ticket identifies the person. If the trunk opens only for the bearer of its matching half, announcing police interest will warn the murderer. The return half was burned in Peter's room. A charred edge was found. Not the complete ticket, I said. Summonee may still have 4,831. Wolfe nodded. Find who presents it at Ashcroft Station. Until then, the journey remains unfinished. Outside, a train whistle drifted across Manhattan, faint and lonely. Helen Carter had packed for 2 days and left everything permanent behind. She had not intended to flee her employer's death, steal his money, or abandon her life. She had intended to meet the brother the world called dead and recover the truth Charles Whitmore had hidden for 7 years. Someone had murdered Charles to stop that truth from arriving. And somewhere in Ashcroft, a locked trunk was waiting for the other half of a ticket. Chapter 4, the file that disappeared, the Ashcroft property folder, had been returned. But Thomas Reed was not satisfied. Neither was Wolfe, though he expressed dissatisfaction differently. Reed put on his hat and searched rooms. Wolfe leaned back, closed his eyes, and expected the rooms to come to him. At 10 o'clock, Thursday morning, Reed telephoned the brownstone. "There's another file missing," he told me. "Perhaps files migrate. This one came from Charles Whitmore's private cabinet. Bring Helen Carter." "Where?" "Whitmore's office." "What about Wolfe?" "You may bring him if you own a crane." I looked across the office. Wolfe was behind his desk reading a report on orchid root disease, with greater concern than he had shown over several human illnesses. "He's occupied," I said. "I heard that. You were meant to." Helen and I reached number 20, 2 Riddle Street, half an hour later. The Whitmore offices had been closed since the murder. A uniformed officer guarded the outer door. Inside, desks stood empty beneath white ceiling lights, and the typewriters looked as if they were holding their breath. Reed waited in Charles's private office with George Pike and Ruth Bell. Pike, the company accountant, had objected to the search until Reed reminded him that a dead owner has little use for office privacy. Ruth, the legal advisor, had objected more carefully and therefore at greater length. Charles's body was gone. A chalk mark remained near the desk. The bronze locomotive used to kill him had been removed for examination. The wall safe stood open. Reed pointed to a narrow oak cabinet near the window. "This is separate from the safe. Whitmore kept confidential board files here." Helen nodded. "Agreements, private reports, and unsigned decisions. You organized it. Every Friday." "When did you last do so?" "Friday afternoon, before I found the private index entry concerning Peter." Reed opened the cabinet. The shelves held rows of dark green folders. Each spine carried a typed label and a small number. One gap appeared on the second shelf between files, marked Board 26 and Board 28. Board 27 was missing. "What was it?" Reed asked. Helen stepped closer. "North River redevelopment." George Pike removed his spectacles. "That decision was not final." "What decision?" I asked. Ruth Bell answered. Whitmore Consolidated had agreed to sell 11 warehouses and 7 Riddle Street properties to North River Renewal. Charles intended to cancel the sale. Why? He discovered that the purchasing company concealed the identities of its owners. Reed looked at Pike. "Who owned it?" Pike polished his spectacles. "I do not know. You handled the accounts." North River Renewal was represented by a bank trust. Which bank? City Merchants. Who controlled the trust? I never saw the private list. Helen looked at the empty space. It was in file 27. That improved the room, Reed said. What else? A draft letter to the City Property Board, reports on the Ashcroft fire, copies of the false travel vouchers, and Charles's signed instruction to suspend all payments connected with North River Renewal. Pike's hand stopped polishing. Reed noticed. How much money? Nearly $2 million, Helen said. Ruth Bell closed her folder. The purchase price was substantially larger. $2 million was the first payment, I said. A business decision damaging enough to upset several breakfasts. It could bankrupt North River Renewal, Ruth said. It could also expose the private investors. Names. I never saw the list. Reed pointed toward Helen. She did. Helen shook her head. I organized the papers without reading the ownership page. Pike gave a soft laugh. Reed turned. Something amusing. Number merely unlikely. Miss Carter read everything. Helen looked at him. Because you frequently made mistakes. I made none involving North River. Then why did Charles order an outside examination of your accounts? Pike's face became rounder, which I would not have thought possible. Ruth stepped between them with her voice. The file is missing, Accusations will not recover it. Sometimes they loosen it, I said. Reed examined the cabinet lock. It had not been forced. Charles carried one key. Helen kept a second. Ruth Bell kept a sealed emergency key in the legal office. "Where is your key?" Reed asked Helen. She opened her handbag and produced a ring containing 6 keys. The cabinet key was there. Ruth showed hers. It remained inside a small paper envelope sealed with Charles's initials. The seal appeared unbroken. Charles's key was missing. "Was it on his body?" I asked. "No," Reed said. "His ordinary office keys were in his pocket. The cabinet key was not," Pike said. "Helen could have opened the cabinet before returning her key to the ring." Helen stared at him. "I did not take the file. You were leaving town. For 2 days. You packed a suitcase. With 2 dresses, not $2 million. Reed crouched before the cabinet. A filing card lay flat on the bottom shelf. He picked it up. It was a pale yellow card marked "File removed. Board 27 by H. Carter, time 7:35 p.m. The initials HC appeared at the bottom. Pike replaced his spectacles. "That settles it." "No," Reed said. "It advertises it." Helen took the card. "That is not my writing." "The initials resemble yours," Ruth said. "They were copied. How can you be certain?" Helen pointed to the top line. "I never write the time by hand. The office has a time stamp for removal cards." Reed looked at the other shelves. 3 spaces contained yellow cards. Each bore a purple machine stamp showing the date and time. The card blaming Helen had no stamp, he said. Someone who knew she used removal cards but didn't know how she completed them. "Anion in the records department knows." "Daniel Whitmore?" "He rarely entered the records room." "Samuel Kent." "He filed documents every day." "George Pike." Pike's expression answered before his mouth did. "I had clerks for that." Reed took the false card as evidence. The gap between files 26 and 28 was narrow. Pale dust covered the shelf, except where file 27 had stood. A second clean mark appeared at the far left, behind a row of old tax folders. Something else had been removed. "What belonged there?" Reed asked. Helen looked. "A small black ledger." Pike spoke too quickly. There was no ledger. Helen turned toward him. "You were never permitted to open this cabinet. I saw it during board meetings." The cabinet remained closed during board meetings. Pike's mouth tightened. Reed stood. "What ledger?" "Charles called it his decision book," Helen said. "He recorded why he approved or rejected major transactions. It covered 20 years. Did it mention the Ashcroft fire? I don't know. North River renewal? Almost certainly. Then 2 things are missing. File 27 and Charles's private ledger," Ruth Bell said. Helen knew both were here. "So did George Pike," I said. "He just proved it." Pike reached for his coat. Reed blocked him. "You'll stay. I have work." "You had work here." "It appears to be disappearing." Helen examined the neighboring folder. "This one has been replaced incorrectly." She pulled out file 28. Every green folder had a black cloth strip along its lower edge. File 28 faced backward, with the cloth strip at the top. Beneath it lay a faint smear of blood. Reed called the laboratory officer from the hall. The smear was small, no larger than a thumbprint. It had been partly wiped away. "Charles's blood?" I asked. "We'll test it," Reed said. Helen looked at the reversed folder. "I would never file it like this," Pike said. "A murderer is not expected to remain tidy." "True," I said, "but someone removing file 27 after Charles was struck might touch the next folder with a bloody hand, pull it out by accident, and replace it backward." Reed nodded. "That means the file was taken during or after the murder." Helen had entered the office at 7:53 and knelt beside Charles. Samuel Kent arrived moments later. Daniel had been in the building before 7:40. Pike claimed to have left at 7:30. Ruth had dined with Charles and Daniel at the Riddle Club. The false removal card stated 7:30. 5. If the blood belonged to Charles, The killer had tried to move the file's disappearance backward in time and place it before the murder. I telephoned Wolfe. He answered with a growl, because I had caught him discussing lunch with Fritz. He gave him the details: board file 20, 7, the concealed owners, the halted payment, the missing decision ledger, Helen's false removal card, and the blood on the reversed neighboring folder. Wolfe said, "Who knew Miss Carter's filing method?" "Everyone who worked in records." "That is not the question. Who believed they knew it but did not?" I looked around the office. Samuel Kent knew she used the timestamp because he worked with her daily. Ruth Bell had received removal cards with stamped times. George Pike claimed he left filing to clerks. Daniel Whitmore rarely entered the records room. "Daniel," I said, "possibly, what time did he leave the building?" "His first statement says 7:10. A porter saw him in the lobby at 7:32, and the false card says 7:35, close." To close, a liar often selects a time adjacent to the truth because invention tires him. "Do you want Daniel brought in?" "I want the ownership list. It's missing." "Ownership is not created by a list. Money leaves tracks." I glanced at Pike, the accounts. "Indeed, Mr. Pike may tell us which bank received the first payment. He says City Merchants held it in trust. Obtain the trust reference number." Pike heard me and said, "That information is confidential." Wolfe heard him through the telephone. "Mr. Goodwin, inform that man that murder has poor respect for bank secrecy." I did. Reed required less ceremony. He ordered Pike to produce the transfer record. Pike opened a locked drawer in the accounting office and removed a thick payment register. The first North River transfer had been divided among 4 trust accounts identified only by numbers. The largest share went to Trust 7,319. The same 4 numbers had appeared on Helen's ticket. Reed looked at her. "Freight record 7,319. Trust account 7,319. Helen shook her head. "That cannot be chance." Wolfe was still on the line. "No," he said. "It is a bridge. The old warehouse fraud and the new property sale are connected." Reed copied the account details. 1 trust payment had been authorized by Daniel Whitmore. A second bore George Pike's approval. A third had been reviewed by Ruth Bell's legal office. The 4th signature belonged to Charles Whitmore. 4 powerful people stood to be damaged by board file 27, including the murdered man himself, Reed said. "Charles may have changed his mind because Helen found the old record," Wolfe replied through the telephone. "Or because Peter Carter threatened to reveal it." Helen gripped the back of a chair. "Peter did not threaten anyone." "You do not know what your brother has done during 7 years of concealment," Wolfe said. "Affection is not evidence." Reed closed the payment register. If Helen took the file, she had motive to expose them, and no motive to hide the evidence, I said, unless she planned to sell it. Helen's face hardened. "I planned to give it to Peter." Pike looked at her sharply. "That was new," Reed said. "You told us you never read the ownership page." "I didn't." "But you intended to take the file." "Number Charles said he would bring it to Ashcroft himself." "Then why did you just say you planned to give it to Peter?" "I meant the evidence Charles intended to release." Wolfe's voice came from the telephone. "Miss Carter, cease improvising. Did Charles give you a document not found in the cabinet?" Helen's silence lasted 3 seconds. "Yes." Reed's eyes narrowed. "What document?" "A sealed statement." "Where is it?" "In my apartment." "We searched your apartment, not the sewing box." Reed signaled to an officer. Helen said, "Charles made me promise not to open it unless he failed to reach Ashcroft." "What is written on the envelope?" Her voice dropped. "The names behind North River." The office became still. Helen had not taken file 27. Charles had made a separate copy of its most dangerous contents and entrusted it to her. The murderer had stolen the file and ledger without knowing that another record existed. That explained why someone had placed the train ticket beside Charles's body. It made Helen appear to be a secretary who stole the file and planned to flee. If the police accepted that story, they would search for stolen documents instead of hidden investors. Reed looked at the false removal card. Summoning wanted Helen guilty, before anyone asked why Charles cancelled the sale. Wolfe said, "Yes, but the performance was careless. A secretary who intended to steal a file would not leave a signed card announcing it. The card was not concealment, it was direction." I looked at the blood-marked folder, the missing cabinet key, and the empty place where Charles's decision ledger had stood. The killer had struck Charles, opened the private cabinet with his key, removed 2 records, touched the neighboring file with blood, and replaced it backward. Then the killer had written Helen's initials on a removal card and placed her ticket on the desk. Not to hide the crime, to tell the police whom to blame. The officer sent to Helen's apartment telephoned 20 minutes later. The sewing box had been forced open. Charles's sealed statement was gone. In its place lay the missing key to his private cabinet. Someone had entered Helen's apartment before the police search and completed the story against her. Reed put down the telephone. "The file is missing, the statement is missing, and Whitmore's key was in Helen's room," Pike said. "How much more do you need?" Reed looked at the false removal card. "Less than someone is giving me." Outside the office windows, Riddle Street shone beneath a thin afternoon rain. Somewhere in the city, board file 27, Charles's decision ledger, and the sealed ownership statement had passed into unknown hands. Helen's ticket suggested flight, her suitcase suggested return, the missing file suggested theft, her filing habits suggested a frame. Thomas Reed turned toward the 4-numbered trust accounts. "The secretary was not preparing to escape with the truth," he said. "Summonan was preparing to bury it with her." Chapter 5. The passenger who was not leaving the ticket had Helen Carter's name on it, but Thomas Reed discovered she had never intended to use it. He discovered that because Nero Wolfe asked me to count her dresses. It was not the first time Wolfe had sent me into a woman's apartment, on an assignment that would sound improper if explained badly. But it was the first time he had instructed me to inspect the seams. "Take Inspector Reed," Wolfe said. "His presence may restrain your imagination." "My imagination is under excellent management." "By whom?" "He had me there. So I went." Helen's packed suitcase remained in her apartment under police seal. Reed and I met her there shortly after noon. She watched from the bedroom doorway while I placed the case upon the bed. "I have already told you what is inside," she said. "Wolfe has trust issues," I said. "With me, with everybody. It saves bookkeeping." The suitcase contained the same articles I had listed earlier. 2 dresses, 3 blouses, underclothing, walking shoes, a hairbrush, and a photograph of Peter Carter in his railway uniform. Reed examined the dresses. "These fit you?" "Yes." "When did you last wear them?" "The blue one last summer, the brown one several years ago." I held up the brown dress. "It's larger than the blue. I lost weight, enough to make it useless." I packed hurriedly. "No," Reed said. "Everything is folded too carefully." Helen looked at him. He removed the shoes. They were size 6. Helen wore size 7. "These aren't yours," he said. "They were my mother's. Why take them on a 2-day journey?" Helen did not answer. I turned the suitcase over. The bottom lining was held by 6 neat stitches of pale thread. 5 were tight. The 6th was loose. I borrowed Helen's sewing scissors and cut the thread. Beneath the lining was a flat compartment. It was empty. A rectangle of dark dust marked where a packet had rested. 4 tiny corners of photographic paper remained caught beneath the cloth. Reed held one to the light. "This suitcase wasn't packed for you." Helen sat on the edge of the bed. "Number. Who was going to carry it?" She looked at the photograph. "Peter." That was the first full truth she had given us without being cornered by it. Reed remained standing. "Your brother was in Ashcroft." "He was. He left before the murder." "Where is he now?" "I don't know." "You arranged the ticket for him?" "Yes, in your name, yes." "Why?" "Because anyone watching Peter Carter would be looking for a man traveling under a false male name. No one would expect him to carry a woman's ticket and a woman's suitcase." I said, "Conductors may notice. The ticket came from the old company stock. It did not require the passenger to show identification. The name was for the company account, not the railway. Reed held the ticket inside its evidence sleeve. The outward half, 4,831, took the bearer from New York to Ashcroft. The return half, 4,831, took someone from Ashcroft to New York. Peter used the return half on Monday night. Then the burned scrap in his Ashcroft room was staged, yes, the blood, from a cut on his hand. He left enough to suggest a struggle. Reed's voice sharpened. Your brother staged an abduction and entered New York secretly. You have withheld that during a murder investigation. He believed the people who arranged the warehouse fire would kill him if they knew he was alive. One man is already dead. I know. Where was Peter when Charles Whitmore was murdered? I don't know. You expect me to accept that? He was supposed to telephone me at 9. He didn't. Where were you to meet? Grand Central, at 10. With the suitcase? Yes. Reed looked at the empty compartment. What was hidden beneath the lining? Photographic copies of the missing freight page, the North River ownership list, and Charles's signed statement. The same statement stolen from your sewing box, number a second copy. The case was collecting missing documents faster than we could name them. Who made the photographic copies? Reed asked. Charles. Where? Peter's old photography room in Warehouse 9. Charles went there 2 weeks ago. How did he enter without attracting attention? He used one of the false travel vouchers. That pulled the old journeys and the murder together. Charles Whitmore had not merely asked Helen to examine the false tickets. He had used the same system to travel secretly to Ashcroft and photograph the evidence. Someone monitoring the travel accounts had discovered the trip. Whose name did Charles use? I asked. Helen hesitated. George Pike's. Reed's eyebrows rose. Pike claims he has not visited Ashcroft in 7 years. He hasn't. Charles traveled under his name. Why? Because Pike authorized the original freight transfer. If anyone saw the voucher, they would assume he was checking old records. Did Pike know? Number. Who did? Charles, Peter, and me. Yet, someone removed the packet from this suitcase. Helen looked at the cut lining. It was there yesterday morning. The police searched the suitcase yesterday. They didn't open the lining. Who entered the apartment after you packed? No one with my permission. The outer door showed no forced entry. The landlord had a key. Helen had one. A third copy had been kept in Charles Whitmore's private office for emergencies. That key had not been found. Reed said. The murderer entered your apartment, stole Charles's sealed statement from the sewing box, planted his cabinet key, and removed the photographic evidence from this suitcase. Yes, then why leave the suitcase packed? To make it appear I intended to flee. I nodded. The same reason the ticket was placed beside Charles. The ticket and suitcase were a matched pair. Together they accused Helen of stealing the private file and preparing to escape. In reality, they had been part of a plan to send evidence out of town under the protection of her name. The ticket was not an escape plan. It was a shield. Reed examined the suitcase handle. A paper label had been tied to it with red string, H. Carter, Ashcroft. The reverse side carried a faint pencil mark. I shaded it lightly. A second name appeared beneath Helen's Pap Carter. Someone had written Peter's name first, erased it, and replaced it with hers. Who prepared the label? Reed asked. Charles. Where? In his office on Monday. Who could have seen him? George Pike came in with the travel register. Daniel arrived around 4. Ruth Bell, she telephoned, but did not come in. Reed put the label into an evidence sleeve. What was Peter supposed to do with the documents? Take them to Judge Henry Cole in Ashcroft. Charles trusted him. The judge had agreed to hold the evidence until the Whitmore board met on Friday. Why send the copies out of town instead of to the police? Charles believed someone inside the city property office was involved in North River renewal. A police report might reach them before the evidence was secured. Who were the hidden owners? I never saw the complete list. You saw part of it. Helen looked toward the window. Daniel Whitmore owned 20%. George Pike owned 10%. Ruth Bell's father, had held 5 before his death. Charles. Yes. How much? 30%. Reed's expression hardened. Charles planned to expose a company he partly owned. He said he had invested before learning the Riddle Street properties were included. When he discovered the connection to the old fire, he ordered the sale cancelled. Did you believe him? I wanted to. That was honest enough to hurt. I telephoned Wolfe. He listened while I reported the false journey, Peter's secret arrival in New York, the hidden suitcase compartment, the missing photographic packet, and Charles's ownership in North River Renewal. When I finished, he said, Miss Carter lied to protect her brother. Yes, and Mr. Carter failed to appear at Grand Central. Yes. Then either he was prevented or he chose another destination. Reed wants to find him. Naturally, ask Miss Carter how her brother intended to identify himself. The matching ticket half. Insufficient. A ticket can be stolen. I asked Helen. She said. He was to say, the last train carried no coal. Wolfe heard her. A phrase connected to the warehouse fire. Yes, Peter always insisted the final freight train left empty. The company report said it carried the relief shipment into Warehouse 9. Then the false freight record concerned an arriving train that was actually empty. Yes. Wolfe made a low sound. Page 7319 did not merely prove theft. It proved the shipment was never inside the warehouse when it burned. Reed took the telephone from me. Someone had killed Charles because that proof was about to reach Judge Cole. Probably, Wolfe said. Who? The person who knew the evidence would leave New York under Miss Carter's name. Daniel, Pike, Kent, and perhaps Ruth Bell knew pieces of the plan. Then determine who knew the whole. Reed glanced at the empty suitcase lining. How? Find Peter Carter. The murderer has either found him or is searching for him. Wolfe hung up. At 3 o'clock. A call came from Grand Central's lost luggage office. A small parcel had been placed in a locker under Helen Carter's name on the night of the murder. The locker had been opened at 10:23 using a claim key. Station records showed that a man had entered the locker room wearing a railway worker's coat and carrying Helen's suitcase. The attendant remembered him because the case bore a woman's name. Peter, Helen said. Reed asked. Did the attendant see his face? Number hat pulled low. What was in the parcel? The attendant doesn't know. Where did the man go? Platform 6. The Ashcroft train had already departed. He boarded the 11 o'clock train to North Mills. North Mills held another closed Whitmore warehouse. One of the false travel vouchers had been issued for that destination. Peter Carter had not taken the planned journey. He had changed trains, carried the evidence somewhere else, and disappeared. Or someone wearing his coat had done it for him. Reed ordered officers to search North Mills. Helen stood beside the packed suitcase, looking at the empty place beneath its lining. Peter knew the plan had been discovered, she said. Then he changed it, I replied, or the murderer changed it for him. That was the bad half of the answer. The good half was that the photographic evidence might still exist. Charles's cabinet file and decision ledger had been stolen, but a copy had left New York. The killer had murdered Charles to stop it and framed Helen to send the police in the wrong direction. The ticket on the desk had never meant that Helen Carter was leaving. It meant someone else was carrying the truth beneath her name. As Reed prepared to leave for North Mills, he turned the ticket over once more. The passenger was not Helen. No, I said. Then who placed it beside Charles? The person who wanted us to believe it was hers. Outside the apartment, Riddle Street looked ordinary. Delivery carts passed. Windows opened. A woman shook a rug from a third-floor sill, but somewhere beyond the city, a passenger who was not supposed to exist was carrying evidence from a crime 7 years old. And someone powerful enough to kill Charles Whitmore was waiting at the end of the line. Chapter 6. The secret in the briefcase. The briefcase arrived at West 35th Street without an owner. At 7:15 Friday morning, the doorbell rang while I was deciding whether Fritz's buckwheat cakes required a fourth helping. A railway messenger stood on the stoop, holding a battered black case and a receipt. delivery for Helen Carter. She doesn't live here. The messenger checked the slip. Forwarding address says Nero Wolfe, West 35th Street. Who gave you the address? North Mills luggage office. Who gave it to them? He shrugged. I deliver cases. I don't raise them. The briefcase was old but solid. 2 brass locks held it shut. A strip of white railway paper had been pasted around the handle. Helen Carter, ticket 4831. I signed for it and carried it inside. Wolfe was in the dining room. He had finished breakfast, but had not yet left for the plant rooms. That gave the briefcase nearly 3 minutes to interest him before orchids became more important. I placed it beside his chair. It has Helen's name, the ticket number, and no key. Wolfe looked at the case. Was it searched? The railway office says it was deposited at North Mills at 11:40 on the night Charles was killed. A man in a railway coat left it and paid to forward it here if unclaimed by Thursday. Description: medium height, hat low, face unseen, Peter Carter, or someone borrowing his outline. Exactly. Telephone Inspector Reed. Do not open it. Without a key, that instruction is easy. I called Reed. He arrived at 8 with Helen and a police locksmith. Wolfe remained at breakfast 2 minutes beyond his ordinary limit, which may have been the strongest evidence that he had accepted the case. Helen recognized the briefcase. It belonged to Charles. Reed examined the locks. When did you last see it? Monday afternoon. He carried it into the photography room at Warehouse 9. You told us he traveled there 2 weeks ago. He went twice. The first time he found the records, the second time he photographed them. Who knew? Peter and I. Wolfe looked at her. You continue offering incomplete lists. Helen flushed. Charles may have told someone else. He did, Reed said. The North Mills station agent remembers a telephone call on Tuesday afternoon. A man asked whether a black briefcase had been deposited under Helen Carter's name. Did the agent identify the caller? Number. The locksmith knelt beside the case. Wolfe said, Wait. He pointed to the white label. Mr. Goodwin. The number. 4831. A. The ticket itself bears 4 penciled figures. 7319. Try them. The locksmith set the first lock to 731. 9 it opened. The second had 4 wheels too. Helen said, 4831. The second lock opened. The ticket was both identification and key. Reed lifted the lid. Inside lay 3 thick packets bound with grey ribbon, a small photographic envelope, Charles Whitmore's private decision ledger, and a sealed statement addressed to Judge Henry Cole. No one spoke for a moment. We had spent 3 days looking for documents that had crossed New York under Helen's name while she remained on Riddle Street. Wolfe glanced at the wall clock. It was 8:12. The orchids had lost 12 minutes, and their owner was unlikely to forgive the murderer for it. Bring the case to the office, he said. We moved there. Wolfe settled behind his desk. Reed took the red leather chair. Helen sat beside him. I placed the contents of the case on the desk and began with the first packet. It contained copies of the old Warehouse 9 freight records. The official manifest stated that Relief Train 44 had arrived at Ashcroft carrying medical supplies valued at $80,000. Page 7319 authorized the goods to be unloaded into Warehouse 9. A second record, photographed from the hidden train ledger, showed that Relief Train 44 arrived empty. The supplies had been transferred 2 days earlier to a private freight company called Northern Storage and sold to 3 wholesalers. The transfer authorization carried George Pike's accounting code. Reed looked at Helen. Pike arranged it. Perhaps, Wolfe said. The second packet contained 7 years of revised company accounts. Each year showed payments to inspection agents who did not exist. The money passed through branch accounts and ended in the 4 trusts that later formed North River Renewal. Again, George Pike's authorization code appeared beside every transfer. The third packet held correspondence between Charles and an unnamed person inside Whitmore, consolidated. The writer warned him against reopening the Ashcroft fire. One letter read, "You protected the company once." Protect it again, Carter remained dead, because everyone benefited from his silence. A second said, cancel the North River sale, and the old account will be placed where your secretary's name cannot survive it. Helen touched the page. The ticket. Wolfe nodded. The threat preceded its delivery. The letters were typed on Whitmore office paper. No fingerprints remained. Each had been mailed from a different part of Manhattan. Reed opened the photographic envelope. Inside were enlarged pictures of account pages. On 3, numbers had been scraped away and replaced. Under angled light, the original figures remained visible. Charles had written notes beneath them. Alteration made after my signature. Access limited to GPW and HC. Helen drew back. My initials. Your position gave you access, Reed said. I made no alterations. Charles included you among the possible operators. He trusted me, Wolfe grunted. Trust is not blindness, Miss Carter. If he was investigating betrayal, he properly included everyone with opportunity. Helen said nothing. The photographs showed something else. The altered entries carried narrow vertical marks at the left edge. They had been made by the old company, Numbering Press. The same machine oil had stained the ticket placed beside Charles's body, I said. The ticket and the false account pages passed through the same press. Wolfe nodded. Someone used the numbering machine not merely to stamp records, but to align altered figures. The pressure marks are identical. Reed said, who operated it? Samuel Kent handled ordinary vouchers, Helen said. George Pike used it for account ledgers. Daniel sometimes used it when preparing board packets, and you. I had my own smaller stamp. 3 people remained. Reed opened Charles's decision ledger. The entries were brief and private. Some recorded business choices, others recorded doubts. 6 months before his death, Charles had written, GP denies knowledge of Ashcroft substitutions. Records carry his code, but not his hand. 4 months before his death, W urged immediate North River purchase, would not identify trust owners. 2 months before his death, HC has found first false journey. Say nothing, let inquiry continue. 10 days before his death, Peter Carter alive. His accusation appears true. Betrayal came from inside family. Reed read the final line twice. Inside family, Helen looked toward me. Daniel, possibly, Wolfe said. Who else? Charles referred to the company as family in several entries. That was true. Earlier pages used phrases like family obligation when discussing employees who had served for decades. George Pike had worked for Whitmore, consolidated for 23 years. Ruth Bell's legal office had served it for 2 generations. Samuel Kent's father had been a warehouse foreman. The word narrowed nothing unless we knew how Charles meant it in that sentence. The final written entry was dated the morning of the murder. Have confirmed method. The betrayer did not create false records. He made true records arrive too late. Wolfe took the ledger that interested him more than the pages carrying names. Archie, read the first false travel voucher. I did. The inspection trip to Ashcroft was dated January 5th. The expense authorization had been entered January 4th. The station receipt was dated January 6th. The receipt came after the trip, Reed said. The true record arrived too late, Wolfe replied. Someone inserted valid receipts after payments had already been withdrawn. Helen leaned forward. They used real tickets to justify earlier thefts. Yes, the records were individually genuine but deliberately misplaced in time. Reed said. That requires control over incoming mail. Who had it? Wolfe asked. Helen answered. Samuel Kent opened company mail. Reed stood. Then Kent manipulated the records. Nonsense, Wolfe said. Reed stopped. Kent opened the mail. Wolfe continued. That made him useful. It does not establish control. Who instructed him where to deliver each receipt? George Pike's accounting office. Who could delay a receipt for 1 day without Kent noticing? Helen considered. Daniel. He often collected the board mail personally. Reed looked at the decision ledger again. Inside family. Still insufficient. We opened Charles's sealed statement to Judge Cole. It began with an admission. 7 years earlier, Charles had accepted George Pike's report that Peter Carter altered the freight record and caused the Warehouse 9 fire. Charles had suppressed Peter's written protest to protect Whitmore Consolidated from scandal. He admitted owning 30% of North River Renewal. He admitted ordering Helen to investigate false travel vouchers without telling her why. Then came the betrayal. Charles wrote that someone had repeatedly used his private board code to alter transaction dates. The code was known only to Charles and one other person. The final line had been crossed out with heavy black ink. Reed held the page toward the lamp. Nothing showed through. Someone opened the statement and removed the name, he said. The seal was intact, Helen said. Wolfe examined the envelope. The outer seal was intact. The lower fold was steamed open and closed again. A faint ripple marked the paper near the bottom. The briefcase had reached us, but someone had handled it before Peter deposited it at North Mills. Peter? Reed asked. Helen shook her head. He would not remove the name, unless the name was his. Wolfe returned the statement. Mr. Carter's conduct remains uncertain, but the briefcase proves Charles was investigating a betrayal within his company. It also proves Miss Carter's journey was part of a rescue plan. Rescue? Reed asked. Daniel Whitmore calls it theft. George Pike calls it fraud. Charles called it betrayal. Helen Carter intended to move the documents beyond their reach, restore Peter's name, prevent the North River sale, and protect the Riddle Street owners. She was rescuing several truths at once. Helen looked at the ticket. It began with that. Yes, the ticket shielded the true passenger, supplied the briefcase combinations, and directed the evidence toward Ashcroft. I said, a travel plan, an identity card, and a lock key. Good value for one fare. Wolfe ignored me. Reed gathered the packets. If Peter left the briefcase at North Mills, why did he not come forward? Because he discovered the statement had been opened, Wolfe said. He no longer knew whom to trust. The doorbell rang. He went to the hall. No one stood on the stoop. A small envelope lay beneath the mail slot. It was addressed to Helen. Inside was a luggage locker key and a note written in block letters. The case is safe. The passenger is not. Ask who changed the time. Helen recognized the phrase beneath it. The last train carried no coal. Peter was alive, or someone knew his password. Reed examined the locker key. A metal tag read North Mills, 27. Wolfe's eyes opened. The missing name may be in that locker. Reed put on his coat. I'll go. No, Wolfe said. Reed turned. The note says the passenger is not safe. Whoever sent it expects pursuit. Send officers openly to North Mills, and the locker will be empty before they arrive. What do you propose? Mr. Goodwin will go as the passenger. I looked at him. Under Helen's name, number that disguise would strain even your confidence. Helen almost smiled. Wolfe placed the unused train ticket beside the locker key. The ticket began a rescue plan. We shall allow the plan to continue. Outside, morning trains were leaving New York in every direction. One carried commuters. Another carried salesmen. A third carried people who preferred not to be found. By noon, I would be riding toward North Mills with a ticket in one pocket and a locker key in the other. Charles Whitmore had died because someone feared what Helen discovered. The briefcase proved the betrayal. The locker might name the betrayer. Chapter 7. The person who changed the schedule the train to North Mills left Grand Central at 12:20 and arrived at 2:06, which gave me an hour and 46 minutes to consider why any civilized man would travel when he owned a chair. Wolfe would have used the time to read, eat, or complain. I used it to study the unused ticket issued in Helen Carter's name, the key to locker 27, and a photograph of Peter Carter. Thomas Reed sat across from me. You're holding the photograph upside down, he said. I'm testing whether Peter improves. Does he? Reed looked out the window. If the man at North Mills was Peter, he carried Charles's briefcase there and deposited it for Wolfe. If it wasn't Peter, someone wanted us to think it was. You've been around Wolfe too long. That's what he says. At North Mills Station. Locker 27 stood at the end of a row beside the parcel office. Reed cleared the room, photographed the lock, and inserted the key delivered to Helen. Inside was a grey overcoat, a railway timetable, a small canvas money bag, a duplicate key stamped WPC, and a ticket for the 11:50 train from North Mills to West Haven on the night of Charles Whitmore's murder. The passenger name was David Ward. The ticket had never been used. Reed examined the money bag. It held $5,000 in large bills. A real escape plan, he said, belonging to a passenger who also missed his train. The railway timetable had been folded open to the West Haven route. 3 departures were circled: 10:10 New York to Ashcroft, 11 o'clock New York to North Mills, 11:50. North Mills to West Haven a fourth time had been written in the margin. 7:52 CW beneath it appeared. 8:05 HC found. Reed stared at the figures. Charles was found at 8:05. Yes. But the medical examiner placed death between 7:40 and 8. Maybe David Ward had better information. The duplicate key-stamped WPC fitted Charles Whitmore's private cabinet. Sumner had copied the missing key before planting the original in Helen's apartment. Reed sealed the objects and questioned the station staff. A clerk remembered selling the West Haven ticket 4 days before the murder. The purchaser was a man between 30 and 40, well-dressed, with pale hair and a dark overcoat. That description suited Daniel Whitmore. It also suited half the men leaving an office on Riddle Street. The clerk remembered one more detail. The buyer asked whether the 11:50 train ever waited for the New York connection. He said he might need to change his schedule at the last moment. The clerk told us. The word schedule followed us back to Manhattan. We reached the brownstone at 5:30. Wolfe had returned from the plant rooms and was seated behind his desk with the day's second bottle of beer. Helen occupied the red leather chair. Daniel Whitmore, George Pike, Ruth Bell, and Samuel Kent had been summoned, but had not yet arrived. Reed placed the contents of locker Archie on Wolfe's desk. Wolfe inspected the West Haven ticket without touching it. Purchase date? Friday, Reed said. 4 days before the murder. Helen's ticket was purchased Saturday. Yes, so the killer's escape preceded the supposed cause of Helen's flight. Reed nodded. Both journeys were planned before Charles died. Wolfe looked at Helen. Your ticket could not have been purchased because you feared arrest for a murder not yet committed. That is what I have said. You have said many things, some of them eventually true. Helen accepted that. Reed pointed to the penciled times. 7:50 Charles Whitmore, 8:05. Helen found him. Whoever wrote this knew the office timeline. Or created it, Wolfe said. I handed over the duplicate cabinet key. The person using the name David Ward had access to Charles's private files. Indeed. DUPC stands for Whitmore Private Cabinet. Possibly Mr. Whitmore had no reason to stamp an explanatory title upon a private key. More likely the letters identify the locksmith. Reed frowned. Why does that matter? Because a duplicate requested under the cabinets. True name would leave a record. A duplicate made from a wax impression would not. The doorbell rang. I admitted Daniel, Pike, Ruth, and Kent. They filled the office with different varieties of reluctance. Daniel looked at the grey overcoat and stopped. Reed noticed. Recognize it? No? You looked as if you did. It resembles hundreds. Pike sat on the couch. Why are we here? Because one of you changed Charles Whitmore's schedule, Reed said. Samuel Kent swallowed. Ruth Bell remained standing. What schedule? His appointments on the night he died. Helen looked at Reed. The desk calendar. What about it? Pike asked. Reed turned to me. That afternoon, while officers searched locker Archie, I had telephoned Clara Dunn, the Riddle Club's dining room manager. She remembered Charles, Daniel, and Ruth dining there on the murder night. The reservation was for 6:30. Charles left at 7:10, saying he had an office appointment at 7:15. Daniel and Ruth remained until 7:50, but Charles's desk calendar showed the appointment at 7:40. Someone had changed it. The original entry had been written in blue ink. The final digit had been altered from a 1 to a 4. turning Tsi Dan Shuwufen into Tsi Sishuwu. Who was the appointment with? Reed asked. Helen answered. The initials were D.W. Everyone looked at Daniel Whitmore. Daniel laughed. That could mean David Ward. The name on the escape ticket, I said. I have never used that name, Wolfe said. Then why suggest it? Daniel's laugh stopped. Ruth Bell opened her folder. Charles often used initials for subjects rather than names. D.W. could mean draft will. It could, Wolfe said. Did you prepare one? No. Then the possibility is idle. Reed continued the reconstruction. Charles left the Riddle Club at 7:10. The drive to his office took 6 minutes. A night porter saw him enter at 7:17. The appointment had originally been set for 7:15. The visitor could have arrived moments later. At 7:20, Charles's office telephone called the accounting department. No one answered. At 7:30, the elevator operator carried a well-dressed man from the third floor to the lobby. He could not identify him because the man kept his face turned away. At 7:30, the same elevator returned empty to the third floor and remained there until 7:50. When Helen arrived, Charles had probably been dead before 7:30. The medical examiner said 7:40 at the earliest, Pike objected. He relied partly on the coffee, Reed said. It was still warm at 8:10, Helen said. Charles never drank coffee after dinner. Wolfe looked at her. Never. It kept him awake. He drank warm water with lemon. Yet a cup of coffee had stood upon his desk when the body was found. The laboratory had now determined that the coffee was poured around 7:50. Charles had been dead before it arrived. Who poured it? Reed asked. Samuel Kent looked toward Daniel. Daniel saw him. Don't. Kent's face went white, Reed said. Speak. Kent gripped the arms of his chair. At 7:45, Daniel telephoned me at home. He said Mr. Whitmore wanted coffee waiting when he returned from the club. You had already left the office, Reed said. Yes, Daniel said the night porter would admit me. So you returned. Yes. What time? 7:48. Did you enter Charles's office? Number. I placed the coffee on Helen's desk. Daniel told me he would carry it in. Daniel stood. That is a lie. Kent's voice rose. You paid me to change the calendar. No one moved, Reed said. When? Monday afternoon. Daniel gave me $50 to change the appointment from 7:15 to 7:45. He said Charles wanted more time at dinner. Daniel turned toward the door. I was already there. Wolfe spoke. Sit down, Mr. Whitmore. Daniel looked at me, Reed, and the distance to the hall. He sat. Reed said to Kent, What else did you change? The elevator record, the 7:31 descent, originally listed a private key call from Charles's floor. I moved it to 7:51. The elevator operator remembered the actual trip. I didn't know he would. Did you place the coffee in the office? Number, I swear. Who did? Daniel. Daniel's face was pale but controlled. This proves I changed a meeting time, nothing more. Wolfe looked at the penciled figures on the timetable. The murderer wished everyone to believe Charles remained alive until nearly 8. A warm cup of coffee, an altered calendar, and a changed elevator record created that belief. Helen arrived at 7:50. At 8:05, Samuel Kent summoned the police. The official schedule placed the death near Helen's arrival. Reed said, but Charles died before 7:31. Yes. While Daniel and Ruth supposedly remained at dinner, Ruth Bell turned to Daniel. You left the table at 7:12. Daniel said nothing. You said you were telephoning the office. Ruth continued. You were gone 25 minutes. I made several calls. The club's telephone log contains no call under your name. Reed stepped closer. You could have driven to Riddle Street, met Charles at 7:15, killed him, and returned to the club before 7:40. Daniel's voice stayed even. Could have is not did. Then why alter the appointment? To conceal a private argument. About North River renewal. Yes. Why buy an escape ticket under the name David Ward? I didn't. Reed held up the grey overcoat. Is this yours? Number. Helen looked at its left sleeve. It has a Whitmore Club tailor's mark. Daniel glanced at her. The inside pocket contained a label from a tailor used by Charles and Daniel. The owner's initials had been cut away, but one black thread remained in the shape of a D-pike, moved away from Daniel on the couch. Wolfe said, still insufficient. Reed turned. You have an altered schedule, a duplicate key, an escape ticket, Kent's statement, and Daniel's missing alibi. We have evidence that Daniel prepared concealment. We do not yet have proof he struck Charles. What else do you want? The object removed from Charles's cabinet, the ownership statement, the missing name from the briefcase, and Peter Carter. Daniel looked at Wolfe. You think Peter killed him? I think Peter has been excluded from every timetable because everyone assumes he remained in hiding. Assumptions are poor locks. Helen stood. Peter did not kill Charles. Wolfe's eyes went to her. Where is your brother? I told you, I don't know. Number, you told us where he was meant to be. Those are different facts. Reed picked up the West Haven ticket. The real escape plan belonged to the killer. If Daniel bought this, he intended to leave North Mills after recovering the briefcase. Or after destroying it, I said. Wolfe examined the railway timetable. The 3 circled trains form a route, New York to Ashcroft, New York to North Mills to West Haven, but the times do not connect. The 10:10 Ashcroft train arrives after the last North Mills connection. Then it is not a route, Reed said. It is a schedule of pursuit. The writer expected Helen's supposed departure at 10:10, Peter's actual departure at 11, and his own escape from North Mills at 11:50. Daniel's eyes moved toward the timetable. Wolfe saw it. So, he said softly, you recognize the plan. Daniel rose again. This time Reed took his arm. Before he could speak, the telephone rang. He answered. A police officer at North Mills reported that Peter Carter had been found unconscious in an abandoned Whitmore warehouse. He had suffered a blow to the head but was alive. In his coat pocket was Charles's missing ownership statement. The final name had not been removed. It was Daniel Whitmore. Reed looked at Daniel. The altered schedule had placed Helen beside the murder. The unused ticket had made her look afraid. The missing files had made her look guilty. But the second ticket, hidden cash, copied key, and changed appointment belonged to someone preparing a real departure. Daniel had not merely created an alibi, he had written himself an escape. Chapter bar. The last message from the secretary. Helen Carter's final message was written in shorthand, hidden in Charles Whitmore's office and addressed to nobody. Thomas Reed found it because Wolfe asked why a secretary had sharpened 2 pencils. That began at 11 Friday morning, after Peter Carter had been taken from the abandoned North Mills warehouse to a hospital. His condition was serious, but not hopeless. The ownership statement found in his coat named Daniel Whitmore as the largest concealed investor in North River renewal. Daniel had been detained, but Wolfe refused to call the case solved. A statement found upon an unconscious man is evidence of possession, he said. It is not proof of murder. Reed was at Wolfe's desk. Helen sat in the red leather chair, exhausted from a night without sleep. I was arranging the unused train ticket, the West Haven escape ticket, Charles's decision ledger, and photographs from his office. Reed said, Daniel altered Charles's appointment, sent Kent back with coffee, bought a ticket under an assumed name, and owned the company Charles intended to expose. Then you have motive preparation and deceit, Wolfe replied. And Peter had Daniel's name in his pocket. He also had a wound on his head. Until he wakes, we do not know who gave him either. Helen looked at Wolfe. Daniel killed Charles. Possibly. You always say possibly. Certainty should be earned. Wolfe picked up a photograph showing Charles's desk immediately after the murder. The unused train ticket lay near the blotter. A cup of coffee stood beside the telephone. The appointment calendar was open at the altered entry. Wolfen, DW2 yellow pencils rested in a tray. Both had recently sharpened points. Wolfe looked at Helen. Did Charles use pencils? Rarely, he wrote in ink. Did Samuel Kent? He chewed them but seldom sharpened them. Who sharpened those? I did. When Helen frowned. Tuesday morning, Both. Yes, I kept one on my desk and one in Charles's office. Why are both in his tray? I don't know. Wolfe pushed the photograph toward Reed. A secretary preparing to leave a position often makes a final record. She also knows where no one else looks. Helen stared at him. Reed saw it. You left a message. She did not answer. Where? Helen looked toward the window. Wolfe sighed. Miss Carter, your brother has been attacked, your employer murdered, and your name deliberately attached to both crimes. Loyalty has become vanity. Helen's face tightened. I did not know whom to trust. You came to me. I did not know whether you would take the case. You left $500. My habits are public. She almost smiled, but it disappeared. The message is inside the pencil sharpener. Reed stood. Why didn't you tell us? Because I wrote it after finding Charles's body. That changed the room. You said Samuel Kent entered seconds after you, Reed said. I lied. He entered at 8:05. I reached the office at 7:50. You were alone with the body for 12 minutes. Yes? What did you do? I checked whether Charles was alive. Then I saw the ticket on his desk and understood that someone was framing me, so you hid a message. I wrote everything I noticed before anyone could remove it. Why not carry the note? If I was searched, it would be found. Why the pencil sharpener? Charles never used it. He disliked the sound. I said, a reasonable objection. It resembles a small saw attacking a tooth. Wolfe ignored me. Reed and I returned to Whitmore, consolidated with Helen. The police seal remained on the office door. The pencil sharpener stood on a side table near the bookcase. It was a heavy metal model with a removable shavings drawer. Reed pulled out the drawer. Pencil shavings filled it. Beneath them, fixed to the underside with sealing wax, was a narrow strip of paper covered in Helen's shorthand. She translated while I wrote, Charles dead when I entered at C. Wushesen, coffee warm but untouched. Desk calendar changed. Original appointment C, Shuwu, cabinet open. File 20-7 and black ledger gone. Ticket on blotter, though I left it with Charles at Wuseshu. Number Tsiten Sembai Ishijio added by him. Red thread beneath desk. Smell of wet wool, trust Peter, with the copies. If I am accused, the journey has been discovered. Reed read it twice. You left the ticket with Charles at 5:40. Yes. You previously said you never saw it before the murder. I was protecting Peter. What did Charles do with it? He wrote Tsiten Sembai Ishijio on the back, folded it, and put it in his inside coat pocket. But at 7:50, it was on the blotter. Yes. The killer removed it from his coat. Yes. Helen's message established that the ticket had been planted before she entered. It also established that Charles's private cabinet was already open, the documents were already gone, and the calendar had already been altered. What red thread? I asked. Helen pointed beneath the desk. The killer's clothing brushed against a splinter near the center drawer. I saw a thread caught there. The original police search had found no thread. Someone had removed it during the 12 minutes after Helen arrived, or during the confusion after Samuel raised the alarm. Reed examined the splinter. A tiny red fiber remained wedged deep in the wood. Daniel had worn a red necktie on the murder night. That looked excellent until Helen spoke. George Pike wore a red scarf. Reed frowned. Ruth Bell's document folder was tied with red cord, I added. The clue had brought friends. What did you mean by wet wool? Reed asked. It had been raining. Someone wearing a damp overcoat had been in the room. Daniel's overcoat from locker Archie, possibly. The grey coat was dry when the station clerk saw it, I said. It could have dried on the train. Reed photographed the hidden message and sent the red fibre for testing. I examined the pencil sharpener. A black smear marked the handle. It was not graphite. It resembled ink from the company numbering press, Helen said. That wasn't there Tuesday morning. Reed looked at the unused ticket. The same purple Jan black ink had stained one edge. We placed the ticket beneath a strong lamp. Its folds had hidden several faint impressions on the back. I could see part of a number pressed into the paper. Reversed, Reed obtained a mirror. The impression read, T. Sishawu. Beneath it was a second fragment, DW. The ticket had been lying beneath Charles's appointment calendar when someone altered the time. The pressure of the pencil had passed through the calendar sheet and marked the ticket below. That rebuilds the sequence, Reed said. At 5 Jan 40, Helen gave Charles the ticket. He wrote C10 Sembai Isha Joe on its back and placed it in his coat. At 7 Jan 15, he met the person identified by the initials. DW Charles was killed before 7 Jan 30 Jan 1. The killer removed the ticket from Charles's pocket, placed it beneath the appointment calendar, and changed Tiden Shuufen to Tsi Sishawu. The pencil pressure left the altered time and initials on the ticket. Then the killer set the ticket on the blotter, where Helen would find it. The murderer poured coffee later, or arranged for Samuel Kent to bring it, making Charles appear alive closer to 8. The unused ticket carried the original journey on its face, and the false murder schedule on its back. Reed said, W means Daniel Whitmore. Helen nodded. Wolfe's voice came through the telephone on the desk. I had called him and left the receiver open during the examination. No, he said. Reed picked it up. What else could it mean? It may mean Daniel Whitmore. It may mean David Ward. It may mean draft will. You are again attempting to convert initials into a conviction. But Daniel caused Kent to change the calendar. Daniel paid Kent to alter the written appointment. That is established. It does not prove Daniel wrote upon the calendar after Charles died. Why would two people alter the same time? An excellent question. Wolfe asked Helen to read her hidden message again. She did. When she reached desk calendar changed, he interrupted. How did you know the original time was Tiden Shuufen? I had entered it that morning. In whose presence? Charles's Samuel entered with the mail. George Pike arrived while the book was still open. Daniel, he telephoned later, and asked what time Charles would return from dinner. Did you tell him? Yes, Ruth Bell. She knew because she attended the dinner. Wolfe grunted. 4 people knew the original appointment, Reed said. Daniel has admitted paying Kent to change it. Has he explained why? He says Charles asked him to delay the meeting. Verify that before enjoying it. Reed put down the receiver. We continued searching inside the wastebasket, beneath torn envelopes. We found the carbon sheet Helen had used when writing her hidden note. She had folded it into a small square before throwing it away. Someone had unfolded it. The black surface carried a clean thumb Jan-shaped patch, where a person had pressed it while trying to read the shorthand impression. The laboratory lifted a partial print. It did not belong to Daniel. It belonged to George Pike. Reed sent officers to bring him in. Pike arrived pale and indignant. I picked up a piece of carbon paper, he said. That is not murder. When? Reed asked. After the police came. Why were you searching the wastebasket? I dropped my pen. You do not use a fountain pen. You use a pencil. Pike's hand moved toward his pocket. Reed stopped it. Inside Pike's coat was a railway receipt. It showed that he had purchased a ticket to West Haven on Friday morning. The same destination as the escape ticket found in locker Archie. The passenger name was George Price. Another G.P. Another false traveler. Another man preparing to leave. Pike looked at the receipt. That journey concerned company business. What business? I cannot say. Reed's expression hardened. Everyone in this case is going somewhere and refusing to explain why. Pike sat down. The hidden message cleared Helen of removing the private file and changing the schedule. It confirmed that she trusted Peter with the copied evidence. It also proved she intended to reveal the truth rather than disappear. But the killer had tried to destroy every version of that truth. The cabinet file had vanished. The sewing box statement had been stolen. The suitcase packet had been removed. Charles's statement in the briefcase had been opened. Peter had been beaten at North Mills. Only Helen's shorthand note remained because the killer had overlooked the underside of a pencil, shavings drawer. Reed placed the unused ticket beside the message. "The whole timeline is on this piece of paper," he said. It had been bought before the murder, proving Helen's plan was not flight from guilt. Charles's penciled number proved he handled it while alive. The pressure marks proved it lay beneath the calendar when the appointment was changed. The ink stain connected it to the numbering press used to manipulate company records. Its placement on the blotter proved someone intended Helen to find it. Its matching half had carried Peter secretly to New York. The ticket was not merely a clue. It was the spine of the crime. I telephoned Wolfe again. "What now?" I asked. "Bring Mr. Pike, Mr. Whitmore, Miss Bell, Mr. Kent, and Miss Carter to my office tomorrow evening." "A gathering?" "Yes." "Do you know who killed Charles?" "I know who changed the schedule. That isn't necessarily the same person." "Number. Then why the gathering?" "Because the murderer believes the missing evidence has been destroyed. We shall correct that belief." "What evidence?" Helen Carter's final message told us whom she trusted. "Peter, indeed, and Mr. Carter is now conscious." I looked at Reed. Wolfe continued. "He has asked to speak with me alone." The line went dead. Outside Charles Whitmore's office, evening settled over Riddle Street. Trains were leaving New York, but none of the suspects had been permitted to board them. Helen's unused ticket lay under the police lamp. The killer had used it to invent an escape. The secretary had used it to rescue the truth. And Nero Wolfe intended to make one of those journeys end in his office. Chapter 9. The ticket that cleared her name at 9 o'clock, Saturday evening. Wolfe's office held the people who had managed Charles Whitmore's company, concealed his money, altered his records, lied about his final appointment, and disputed who had earned the privilege of murdering him. Helen Carter sat in the red leather chair. Her brother Peter, pale from the blow at North Mills, occupied the yellow one. A bandage crossed his forehead, and Inspector Thomas Reed had stationed an officer behind him, in case illness developed ambitions. Daniel Whitmore and George Pike sat at opposite ends of the couch. Ruth Bell stood near the bookshelves. Samuel Kent had been given the straight chair by my desk, and looked grateful for anything that did not have bars. The unused train ticket lay before Wolfe. Ticket 4831. New York to Ashcroft, passenger, Helen Carter, departure, 10:10 on the night of the murder. It had begun as the strongest evidence against her. Reed intended to use it to clear her name. Wolfe leaned back. "Mr. Reed requested this gathering," he said. "He will proceed." Reed stood beside my desk. Charles Whitmore was killed between 7:20 and 7:30. The original police theory placed the murder closer to 8 because the office calendar showed a meeting at 7:40. 5 warm coffee stood on the desk, and Helen Carter entered shortly before the body was reported. Helen looked at the ticket. Reed continued. "Someone wanted us to believe Helen killed Charles, stole board file 27, packed a suitcase, and prepared to leave New York at 10:10. George Pike folded his arms. "The evidence still supports that." "No," Reed said. "The ticket destroys it." He lifted the ticket by its edges. It was purchased 3 days before the murder. Helen could not have bought it to escape punishment for a crime that had not happened. Pike said, "She could have planned the murder. She never intended to use the ticket." "That is what she says. It is what the luggage proves." Her suitcase contained clothing and shoes unsuitable for her. A hidden compartment beneath its lining had carried photographic copies of company records. Peter Carter was the intended passenger. Peter spoke quietly. "I came to New York using the matching half. I was to return to Ashcroft with the evidence under Helen's name." Reed nodded. "The ticket was a shield. Anyone watching Peter Carter would search for a man traveling under another man's name. The company ticket required no personal identification. The suitcase, label, and passenger record all pointed to Helen. Daniel looked toward Peter. "You were supposed to be dead. I was supposed to be guilty too." Daniel said nothing. Reed placed the ticket under the desk lamp. At 5:40 on the murder afternoon, Helen gave this ticket to Charles. He wrote the freight reference 7319 on the back and put it in his coat. When Helen returned at 7:53, the ticket was lying on his blotter. "So Charles removed it," Pike said. "He was already dead." Reed turned the ticket over. The killer took it from Charles's pocket and placed it beneath the desk calendar while changing the appointment from 7:15 to 7:40. 5. The pencil pressure marked the ticket. The reversed impression of 7:45 DW was visible beneath angled light. The ticket was then placed openly upon the desk for Helen to find. "It was not accidentally left, it was planted," Helen said, "to make me look frightened." "Yes, the murderer knew you had packed a suitcase and intended to meet Peter at Grand Central. He converted a plan to protect evidence into a story of escape." Reed laid Helen's hidden shorthand message beside the ticket. Before Samuel Kent entered, Helen recorded what she saw. Charles was already dead. The coffee had not been touched. The private cabinet was open. File 27 and the decision ledger were gone. "The calendar had been changed," Pike said. "A message written by the suspect proves only what the suspect once believed. It was written before the police knew the file was missing. Before we found the altered calendar, and before anyone discovered the decision ledger in North Mills. It contains facts Helen could not have invented afterward," Wolfe said. "The distinction is elementary." Pike looked at him. "You have defended her from the beginning. Miss Carter has lied repeatedly. Her lies protected her brother and the evidence. Yours protected yourself." Pike's face did not change, but his right hand closed. Reed opened the recovered briefcase. The missing documents exposed two separate offenses. Daniel Whitmore manipulated the North River sale and secretly owned a large share of the purchasing company. George Pike manipulated the records that concealed the theft. Daniel stood. "That is false." Peter reached inside his coat. The officer behind him moved, but Reed nodded permission. Peter produced a folded photograph. It showed Daniel and Pike inside warehouse 6 months before Charles's death. They stood beside open crates of company records. "The camera was hidden," Peter said. "I placed it after learning someone was searching the closed warehouses." Daniel stared at the photograph. Pike said, "A visit to company property is not a crime." "No," Reed replied. "Opening sealed freight records and removing pages is." Daniel turned to Pike. "You said the warehouse was empty." Pike's eyes narrowed. "That sentence did more than the photograph," Reed said. "You went there together." Daniel sat again. "I was protecting my investment." "You were searching for page 7319. "Yes." "Why?" "Pike told me it could connect North River to the old relief shipment." Pike spoke sharply. "You knew that without me." Daniel laughed once. "I knew what you told me. I did not know Peter was alive." Reed moved between them. Daniel Whitmore altered the office schedule. He paid Samuel Kent to change Charles's appointment and elevate a record. He planned to steal the ownership statement during a private meeting at 7:15. Ruth Bell looked at Daniel. "You intended to rob your uncle." "He intended to destroy me." "He intended to expose you." "That is a matter of wording." "It is a matter of law," Reed said. "But Daniel did not kill Charles." The room became still. George Pike's arms unfolded. Daniel looked up. Reed turned toward Pike. "You did." Pike's voice was controlled. "On what evidence?" "The timeline you tried to change." Reed placed 2 railway receipts on the desk. The first was the West Haven escape ticket bought under the name David Ward. The second was the West Haven ticket bought under the name George Price. Daniel purchased the David Ward ticket, Reed said. He planned to take the ownership statement, go to North Mills, recover the briefcase, and leave for West Haven if Charles exposed the fraud. Daniel's silence confirmed it. Pike discovered Daniel's plan, Reed continued. He decided to use it. Pike shook his head. You took Daniel's grey overcoat from the Riddle Club cloakroom when he left the dining table to telephone Kent. Wearing it, you went to Charles's office for the 7:15 appointment. That is invention. The cloakroom attendant remembers giving the coat to a man who presented Daniel's claim tag. Daniel's tag was found in your wallet this morning. Pike's right hand moved toward his pocket. The officer behind the couch stepped closer. Reed continued. You knew Daniel had arranged for Kent to change the calendar. You knew the altered time would place Charles alive after 7:45. You also knew Daniel's hidden investment gave him motive. Pike said. Daniel could have killed him himself. He could have, but at 7:23, Daniel was speaking to Kent from a street telephone beside the Riddle Club. The call lasted 6 minutes. The telephone clerk identified him. Daniel said, I told you that. You told me you called from inside the club. You lied because the street telephone was beside the taxi stand, and you did not want us to know you had arranged a car for later. Reed returned his attention to Pike. At 7:23, while Daniel was on the telephone, you were with Charles. Pike's expression remained fixed. You demanded the decision ledger and file. 27, Charles refused. You struck him with the bronze locomotive. Then you opened the private cabinet using the duplicate key you had made from Charles's original. Pike looked toward the key from locker 27, Reed said. Wampasi does not mean Whitmore private cabinet. It is the mark of William Pike, clockmaker and locksmith, your brother's shop. That was the overlooked connection. Pike said nothing. You removed the documents, Reed continued. You changed the calendar, using Helen's ticket beneath it. You placed the ticket on the blotter, then you left wearing Daniel's coat. Ruth said. The red thread beneath the desk. Reed nodded. It came from Pike's scarf. The laboratory matched the fiber. The wet, wool smell in Helen's hidden message came from Daniel's rain-soaked coat worn by Pike. Pike looked at Daniel. You brought the coat to the office yourself. Daniel shook his head. You stole it from the club. Reed placed the carbon sheet from the wastebasket on the desk. After the police arrived, Pike returned to the office as company accountant. He searched the wastebasket, found the carbon impression of Helen's shorthand note, and realized she had made a record. He removed the visible red thread, but missed the fiber driven into the desk splinter. Pike said, You still cannot prove I struck Charles. Peter Carter spoke. He confessed to me. Everyone turned. Peter's voice was weak but clear. At North Mills, Pike demanded the briefcase. He said Charles had died because he would not surrender it. I refused. Pike struck me and searched my coat, but I had hidden the briefcase with the railway clerk. Pike stood. That man is a fugitive and an admitted liar. Wolfe opened his eyes. He is also wearing a recording wire. Pike froze. I reached beneath Peter's coat and removed the small device. Reed had secured there before the gathering, Wolfe said. Mr. Carter's statement was bait. You were expected to deny meeting him. Instead, you attacked his character and called him a liar, before Inspector Reed disclosed that he had identified you. Pike looked toward the door. I was already standing there. Reed took out his handcuffs. The missing documents supplied motive. Helen's message supplied the original condition of the office. The ticket supplied the sequence. Peter supplied your admission. Pike's composure broke. Daniel began it, he said. He created North River. He ordered the records changed. Daniel's face hardened. You changed them for years. Because you paid me. You killed Charles. He was going to send us both to prison. Reed stepped forward. So you sent Helen toward it instead. Pike looked at the unused ticket. It had seemed to prove that Helen planned to flee after murdering her employer. Instead, its purchase date proved the journey was planned before the crime. Its number opened the evidence briefcase. Its penciled reference led to the stolen freight record. Its pressure marks preserved the original meeting time. Its position on the desk proved the killer had planted it. The evidence of Helen's guilt had become proof of her innocence. Reed fastened the handcuffs around Pike's wrists. "You used her journey as a false story," he said, "but you left the true timetable pressed into the ticket." Pike was taken into the hall. Daniel remained on the couch, waiting for charges of fraud, conspiracy, theft, and obstruction. Samuel Kent would answer for altering records. Ruth Bell had to account for her father's part in the old fire report. Peter Carter's name was not yet restored, but the evidence required to restore it lay on Wolfe's desk. Helen picked up the evidence sleeve containing ticket 4831. "I never used it," Wolfe said. "On the contrary, it carried your purpose farther than the train could have done." She looked at him. "It cleared your name," he said. "That is a journey." Outside, a train sounded somewhere west of Manhattan. The ticket had not taken Helen Carter out of New York. It had brought the truth back. Chapter 10. The train that never left 3 weeks after George Pike left Wolfe's office in handcuffs. Thomas Reed returned with the train ticket in his pocket and final answers in a brown folder. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and New York had decided to behave like spring. Sunlight entered the office windows. The traffic on West 35th Street had lowered its voice, and Wolfe had just come down from the plant rooms after spending 2 hours with orchids that required more attention than most governments. Helen Carter and Peter arrived together. Peter's head had healed, though a pale line remained above his right temple. Helen wore the same grey suit in which I had first seen her, but her face no longer carried the strain of a woman guarding 3 secrets and expecting all of them to become fatal. Reed took the red leather chair. Helen and Peter sat on the couch. Wolfe settled behind his desk. I was at mine with a notebook, though the case had already produced enough paper to support a small roof. Fritz brought beer for Wolfe, coffee for Reed, and tea for Helen and Peter. Wolfe inspected his glass. "Proceed." Reed opened the folder. "George Pike has signed a complete confession." Helen's hand tightened around her cup. "He admits killing Charles Whitmore, stealing board file 27 and the private decision ledger, opening Charles's sealed statement, and attacking Peter at North Mills." Peter said, "Why confess now?" "Because the physical evidence, the recording from Wolfe's office, and Daniel Whitmore's statement left him nowhere useful to go." I said, "He had a West Haven ticket." Reed nodded. "The railway was more inviting than the law, but he never reached it." Wolfe took a sip of beer. "What did Mr. Pike say about the old warehouse fire?" "He admitted changing the freight records under Daniel's orders. The relief shipment was removed before the fire and sold through Northern Storage." Pike altered page 7319, delayed the true railway receipts, and prepared the report blaming Peter. Peter looked down for 7 years. He had been officially dead and unofficially guilty. Clearing a name should make noise, but sometimes it enters the room quietly and sits beside the person who has waited for it. Reed continued. "Daniel Whitmore admits organizing North River renewal and concealing its ownership. He claims Charles approved the original plan." "Did he?" Helen asked. "Yes," she closed her eyes. Wolfe said, "Charles Whitmore's later repentance does not erase his earlier consent." Helen opened her eyes. "I know." Reed looked at Peter. "Charles accepted Pike's false report after the warehouse fire. He suppressed your written protest and allowed everyone to believe you had caused the loss. He did it to protect the company and his own investment." Peter's voice was level. "He knew I was innocent. He knew the evidence was doubtful. Later, he learned it was false, and still did nothing for 7 years." "Yes," Helen said, "until he began the investigation." Reed nodded. 6 months ago, Charles discovered that Pike and Daniel were using the same method again. Genuine railway receipts were being placed into the accounts after money had already been withdrawn. The false journeys made those withdrawals appear legitimate. Wolfe said, "Mr. Pike did not invent a new fraud. He repeated an old one because it had succeeded." "He also used the journeys to search closed Whitmore properties," Reed said. "He knew Peter had hidden copies of the original freight record somewhere. Charles noticed the pattern and ordered Helen to examine the travel vouchers." Helen looked at Wolfe. "He wanted me to find the truth without telling me he had hidden it." "Yes," Wolfe said, Cowardice often borrows the clothing of caution. She accepted the sentence without defending Charles. Reed removed several legal papers. The North River sale has been cancelled. The City Property Board has frozen all 4 trust accounts. The Riddle Street owners will recover the properties or receive payment from the seized funds. What about Whitmore Consolidated? I asked. It will survive, though the board has removed Daniel and Pike. Ruth Bell has resigned as legal advisor. Helen looked surprised. Ruth was not charged. Her father prepared the old deeds, but the evidence shows he did not know that the false agents were controlled by Daniel and Pike. Ruth concealed nothing connected to Charles's murder. She resigned because she did not want the Bell legal office tied to the company any longer. Samuel Kent, Peter asked. Probation is likely. He altered the calendar and elevator record for money, but he cooperated after the murder and testified against Daniel. I said, a modest reward for discovering honesty late. Reed closed one paper and opened another. Peter Carter has been formally cleared of the warehouse fraud and fire. The police notice declaring you wanted has been withdrawn. The death record filed under your name will be cancelled. Peter gave a short laugh. I have spent 7 years proving I was alive. Now I need a court order. Government prefers life in duplicate, I said. Wolfe looked at Reed. The evidence briefcase? Delivered to Judge Henry Cole, the original recorder page and Charles's statement will remain with the court. The photographic copies belong to Peter. The missing cabinet file. Recovered from a storage box registered to Pike under the name George Price. The decision ledger was already in the briefcase, Helen said. Then everything was found. No, Wolfe said. She looked at him. 7 years were not found. Your brother's work, home, and reputation cannot be returned in their original condition. Peter leaned back. But I'll take my name. That satisfied Wolfe enough for him to lower his eyelids. Reed reached inside his coat and removed a clear evidence sleeve. The unused ticket lay within it, 4,831. A New York to Ashcroft, Helen Carter. 10 on the night, Charles Whitmore died. The railway released it, Reed said. The court has photographs and laboratory reports. It is no longer needed as evidence. He handed it to Helen. She held it by the edges. I thought it would take Peter to Ashcroft. It took Pike to prison, I said. Reed smiled faintly. The first time I saw it, I thought you had killed Charles and planned to escape. You had a ticket, a packed suitcase, access to the missing documents, and no useful explanation. I gave you several explanations. None useful. That was intentional. So was my suspicion. Helen turned the ticket over. Charles's penciled number, 7,319, remained visible beneath it. The pressure marks from the altered calendar could still be seen under the right light. It carries the whole case, she said. Wolfe moved a finger against his chair. It carries no case. People assigned meanings to it. Pike made it an accusation. You made it a shield. Your brother made it identification. Charles made it an index. Inspector Reed made it a timetable. And you? Helen asked. I made it remunerative. I looked at him. That reminds me, who is paying us? The recovered North River Fund. Approved. Judge Cole signed the order yesterday. Then the ticket has achieved greatness. Wolfe frowned. Money does not confer greatness. It frequently pays the expenses. Peter looked at Helen. What will you do with it? She considered. I could burn it. No, Reed said. Why? Because appearances should be kept where they can be questioned. That was good enough to write down. Helen removed the ticket from its sleeve. I'll place it in the Riddle Street archive, with Charles's decision ledger. Peter shook his head. Charles doesn't deserve a memorial. Not to Charles, to what happened. Wolfe said. An object may preserve a warning without honoring its owner. Helen nodded. She looked toward the office windows. I'm going back to Whitmore, consolidated for 6 months. The board asked me to organize the records for the inquiry. Why return? Peter asked. Because they spent 7 years hiding the truth in files. I know the files, I said. That may be the most threatening sentence a secretary has ever spoken. She smiled. Reed gathered his papers. There is one detail Pike never explained. Wolfe's eyes opened. What? Why he left the ticket in Charles's hand instead of on the desk. Helen corrected him. He didn't. It was on the blotter when I entered. Reed nodded. You picked it up? Yes. Why hold it when Kent arrived? Helen's smile disappeared. I heard footsteps in the outer office. I thought the killer had returned. The ticket was the only thing proving the journey had been discovered. I held it because I meant to hide it. But Kent entered before you could. Yes. Reed looked at Wolfe. So Pike did not arrange her fingers around it. Helen took it herself. Wolfe regarded the ticket. That resolves the last physical ambiguity. It also confirms her purpose. A guilty woman preparing to flee would have concealed the ticket because it incriminated her. Miss Carter tried to conceal it because it protected her brother. The same act could appear guilty or innocent, depending upon the truth behind it. That had been the case from the beginning. Helen's suitcase had looked like preparation for permanent flight, yet it contained clothing meant to hide a courier. The missing file had looked like theft, yet someone removed it after Charles died. The divided ticket had looked like an escape fare, yet it served as identification. Peter's disappearance had looked like guilt, yet it preserved the only witness to the old fraud. Charles's investigation had looked like courage, though much of it had been belated remorse. George Pike's calm had looked like innocence, because he wore it professionally. Reed stood. I think we're finished. Wolfe glanced at the wall clock. You have exceeded the case by 11 minutes. It was nearly 7:30. Dinner approached, and justice had begun interfering with appetite. Fritz entered. Dinner is ready. The smell of roast beef, baked potatoes, and onions reached the office. Wolfe rose immediately. Helen put the ticket into her handbag. At the door, she turned. Mr. Wolfe, did you ever believe I planned to run? Yes. She looked surprised. For how long? Until Mr. Goodwin described your suitcase. You packed 2 dresses that did not fit, shoes that were not yours, and no personal papers. You wished someone to believe a woman was traveling, but you had not packed a life. Helen looked at me. You counted my dresses. Professional dedication has strange hours. Peter laughed. They left with Reed, through the window. I watched them descend the brownstone steps and join the evening traffic. Helen carried the unused ticket. Peter walked beside her under his own name. No one boarded a train. In the following months, North River Renewal was broken apart. The stolen property funds were returned. Daniel Whitmore received a prison sentence for fraud and conspiracy. George Pike was convicted of Charles Whitmore's murder. Samuel Kent left New York and found work in a place where, I hoped, nobody allowed him near a calendar. Helen completed the company inquiry and then resigned. She became keeper of the Riddle Street archive, where she placed ticket 4831, inside a glass case. Beneath it she wrote, a departure may be an escape, a warning, Oregon a promise. Ask who was meant to travel. People came to see it because ordinary objects become interesting after they have been misunderstood by enough people. The train on the ticket left Grand Central at 10:10 without Helen Carter. She never took the journey printed upon it. Her brother returned without using it. Yet the ticket traveled through an office, a murder, a false accusation, a hidden briefcase, and 7 years of buried records. It carried the truth farther than any railway could have taken it. Every departure does not mean someone is running away. Sometimes the road prepared in secret leads toward the truth. And on Riddle Street, people still remember the secretary whose train never left.